Seat?
Just need to make sure we've still got control. Yes, you do. Okay.
Thank you. If we could have councillors come to the table, please. Okay, since we now have quorum, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the July 17th Governance and Priorities Committee meeting. I'd like to first recognize that we are on the traditional territory of the Nanaimo First Nation. Today, our clerk is Ms. Sheila Gurry. Today's Governance and Priorities Committee meeting will be held in accordance with the Community Charter and the Council Procedure Bylaw 2018, number 7272. The question period sign-up sheet is on the table by the double doors to my left for the agenda items only. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item, please write down your name on the agenda item, about the agenda item on the sheet. Members have been granted the authority to join the meetings electronically, and we currently have Councillor Manley and Councillor Eastmore here. Thank you so much. And I think we've got Councillor Brown joining us a little later, but so far that's it for now. There he is. Councillor Brown, good to see you. So we are only missing, I think, Councillor Gieselbrecht, right? Okay, we'll start with the introduction of late items. Ms. Sheila Gurry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For late items for this afternoon's meeting, we're replacing document titled Upcoming Topics and Initiatives with the attached version that's in your addendum, and that's agenda item 5.1. Agenda item 6A1, we're adding a PowerPoint presentation titled Nanaimo Systems Planning Organization, and we're removing agenda items 6C1 2023 Communications and Engagement Plan. And that's it, Chair.
Thank you so much. If I could have a motion for adoption of the agenda? Thank you. So moved by Councillor Emmons, seconded by Councillor Armstrong. All those in favor? No one's opposed? Motion carried. Thank you so much. Motion for adoption of the minutes is circulated. Can we take the two motions together, Ms. Gurry?
Yes.
Thank you, Mayor Krogh, and seconded by Councillor Thorpe. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all those in favor? No one's opposed. Motion's carried. Thank you so much. Agenda planning, upcoming topics and initiatives. Ms. Gurry, if you could take us through that, please.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So for upcoming topics and initiatives, we have July 17th, today's GPC meeting noted, and today's topics are noted there as well. For July 26th, we have rescheduled the BC Energy Step Code and Zero Carbon Step Code implementation to be held on that meeting date, as well as an update on the City of Nanaimo Privacy Management Program. We're looking, as there was originally no scheduled GPC meetings in September, we are looking to schedule a special one on September the 6th or the 27th of September to have the 2023 City of Nanaimo Communications and Engagement Plan come to that meeting, as well as Public Safety Committee Terms of Reference, Town Hall Implementation Strategy, and then going forward to October for initiatives from my area would be the city plan monitoring committees working together collaboratively with Mr. Lindsay's section, and the city plan draft monitoring strategy introduction will be brought forward that day as well. We're hoping. And then as well as you see other topics noted, RCMP, business case for the detachment expansion, Development Corporation background report by Mr. Alan Nielsen, review of city incentives and tax exemption, all of those items coming to October. And then we have a November meeting, as well as we've put down, because it's not just for GPC meetings, we've put down the e-town hall that we normally have scheduled in December for budget feedback or feedback on the financial plan from the community. So that is what we have, Chair. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
If we have questions, yes, Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. Just going to the review of city incentives and tax exemption, is it possible to talk about how our taxes are calculated, as every year we have to go through that? Because I think a lot of people don't understand that process.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Councillor Armstrong. What was that item, Councillor Armstrong?
Under, you have review of city incentives for October 23rd in tax exemption.
Yes.
And I was just wondering if it was possible that we have Ms. Mercer or somebody from finance talk about how municipal taxes are calculated, because every year we get so many questions on that, and people I don't think understand it, so.
Yes, that's a great idea, and I'll pass that on. I'm sure she can
Thank you.
accommodate that.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, Ms. Gurry, do we need any motion? No? Thank you so much. We'll move on to the next item then. So we now have a presentation regarding the Systems Planning Organization, SPO. We have John McCormick, I understand, and who is the Executive Director of the Nanaimo Systems Planning Organization Society. Is Andrew Thornton here as well? Andrew Thornton? Great. PhD, Research and Knowledge Mobilization Lead. And as well, Don Bonner. It's so good to see you here, Don. And as well, of course, I have to say, as one of our past counselors, so good to have you back here at the table. So I'll let you go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. On behalf of the board of the Nanaimo Systems Planning Organization, I would like to thank the Chair, His Worship, and Council for giving us the opportunity to come here and speak with you today. And I'd also like to acknowledge that we are holding our meeting today on the traditional territory, Sinamuk Muslimuk. So I'm going to just do a very short introduction, and then going to leave it to our Executive Director, John McCormick, and Andrew here to carry on with the actual knowledgeable stuff. So I'd like to recognize also that we have 7 board members, Gloria Wells, Jason Harrison, Emmy Manson, myself, Tyler Brown, Jerry Davis, and Dr. Sandra Allison. And in addition to that, we also have Lisa Brinkman, who attends many of our meetings, as well as Hillary Ismir, and they're both more than welcome to attend as many as they wish in the future. And in addition to that, we have 3 staff, our Executive Director, John McCormick, Andrew Thornton, who is our Research, Knowledge, and Mobilization Lead, and Lorna Beecroft, who is our Financial Controller. And with that, I would like to turn it over to the folks who are going to do the presentation. Pass me the...
Thanks very much, Don. So thank you very much for allowing me to participate in this conversation today and to do so remotely. I appreciate the opportunity. So I will go through the slide deck rather quickly because Council has had the chance to review it. And then we'll sort of get to the meat of the conversation and sort of the last third of this of the slide deck. But I did want us to just quickly get oriented about the work of the System Planning Organization for starters, and to start us off in the conversation. So it is really the health of the community. It does revolve around housing, and so I think that the sign that is on the corner of the street near City Hall that reads the housing is healthcare is a very appropriate one for the purposes of this conversation today. We are going to focus on the work of the SPO since inception, and then how to be effective working partners with the city. And so this is, and the second part of that is obviously the most important part of the conversation today. So we are all aware that the population has reached that interesting 100,000 citizens mark. It's coming about as a result of migration, diversity, and we do have an aging population. These are all factors that kind of were part of the backdrop for the Health and Housing Action Plan. And at the time of the plan, there were about 6,000 people living on the edge of homelessness, about 1,800 experiencing homelessness on a periodic basis. And at the time, 2 years ago, about 180 were identified as being absolutely shelterless. That number, based on the most recent point in time count, and I'll ask Andrew maybe to speak to this, is now at about 500. So things have changed, and we all know it, and we're aware that it's having a big impact. Councillor Manley is clearly feeling that every day in the shelter that is part of his other life. So maybe Andrew, if you can just speak briefly to the point in time count for a minute or two, and then we'll move forward.
Okay, thanks, Don. I'll make a fuller presentation to Council when I get the report finished. September 1st-ish, but I will point out it was April 27th I have the data, but I can't, I'm not.
I'm going to get you to turn your mic just towards your face. No, I think the other one, the tall one,
Oh,
is
okay,
that not working?
okay, all right.
Thank you.
Is that loud enough?
That's good.
Okay.
That's good. Thank you.
So I do have the data. I'm picking through it. I'm not going to give you an official number because you'll say, Andrew, you said 512 in July and it's 506 on the report. What's up with that? But I can tell you it's a 20% increase, give or take 1 percentage point from 2020. The other variables and demographics are largely the same, although one of the things that's particularly interesting is at least half of the survey respondents responded that they lived in an encampment for some period of time in the last year. So that's a new question, new bit of data that we have from the pig count that might be of particular interest. And we continue to have a very high number of relative percentage of people with absolutely no shelter at all on a nightly basis, somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 people, give or take. Depends what time of year it is, depends if it's in the winter or after the emergency weather shelters are closed. And it's going to be interesting to be able to compare and contrast to other communities because of COVID. Some communities did their pig counts in 2021 and 2022 despite COVID. So it's very, I don't envy the people at the federal level who are trying to sort the data. But the most important thing about pig count data is it's trend data. And that's what we're trying to track are the trends over time. And as casual observation and all of our other data would suggest, our trend is upwards in terms of homelessness. I think I would leave it at that for now and turn back to Jean.
Thanks, Andrew. The action plan is really the document that guides our work every day, and so it has as we will recall, a few guiding principles associated with it. Again, I won't go through those in detail, but the document itself is kind of our very much our the most important piece of the work that guides us. But at the same time, we're not, as we see it, we're not stuck in that document itself. And as new information comes to light, as I indicated in the numbers and in other ways, we're going to be incorporating that into our work. So the work came about, as we recall, from a combination of community members and stakeholders, as I'll call them, that are listed here. And it led to the development of the board of directors, and then my eventual hiring, and now the team being developed as of April 1st of this year. So we've been tasked with sort of looking at a number of ways in which the community can move forward in addressing housing. Systems coordination clearly is a big piece of that. Diverse housing options, leadership and engagement around the work that we're trying to do. And really, from my perspective, or from our perspective at the SPO, that means how do we work collectively together to make the case for Nanaimo. Prevention is a big part of the work I think that we need to do. I think that if we use the metaphor of a bathtub, we want to stop the inflow as quickly as possible. And we want to do so in a way that prevents people from falling into homelessness. We know that a large number of people who end up in homelessness, more than 50%, are from Vancouver Island. And so if we can do some work around this, it's a very pernicious challenge to try and figure out who might fall into homelessness. Often we don't know until it's very late in the day, too late to maybe respond. So we're doing all the work we can to try and identify best practices in that regard, so that we can start to really slow and even stop the number of people who are falling into homelessness. The capacity for us to actually respond to complex needs is also a very important part of the work that we're doing. We're having conversations, for example, with Clearview at this time to try and think about and address and contemplate what it might look like to have a really fully engaged capacity there, so that we can actually address people who are in high complex need. And then, poverty reduction, yes, to that. How we do that is a community-wide challenge, and some of it has to do with providing the means for people to have shelter. So here's the work that we do, and it really focuses around, if we don't know where we're going, any road will get us there. Currently, we have a health and housing action plan, but it doesn't actually tell us where we need to get to. And so I think we want to start engaging in community conversations, community-wide conversations as soon as possible. And we think that by mid-September, we'll be working with stakeholders on a community-wide plan for work that we can do as a collective to start to address what has been a very difficult challenge. And it's taken us a long time to get there, and so it's going to take us a while to get out of it as well. So we're aware that this is going to require patience and dedication and commitment, and a certain amount of just consistency in the work we're doing. And so for as we're developing housing, that needs to be happening on an ongoing basis, not in pulses. If we are looking at shelter spaces, we need to have enough shelter spaces, and to do so in a way that can respond to the need. So over the next 5 years, this is our work. This is what the city is helping us to do, is to make significant progress in addressing homelessness, because the business of Nanaimo is housing in every level that we think of. People are moving here because it's an incredibly great place to live. People are being unhoused because the cost of living is going up and the cost of rent is going up, or people are having to liquidate their assets, and before you know it, they're homeless. Or they come here for work and they just can't find enough work to maintain the rent. So our mission is to enable coordinated action and advocacy by our stakeholders and the broader community to address homelessness. And it's pretty clear that our work can focus around research, data and analysis, education information, convening transparent leadership, as I discussed already, coordinating a systems approach to how we're doing things. So we've started to work this way. And for those around the room who've been part of these conversations, you're starting to see how we're convening tables in a sort of conversations that are a little bit broader than they might have been in the past. In the past, these conversations, for example, would have been mostly around reaching home, for example, which is a small amount of money and a relatively small impact on the community. We need to have those kind of conversations, but at much higher levels. And then operating in partnership with others in community, including the city, on identifying, communicating, and coordinating approaches to deal with systems gaps. For example, right now we're going through this health and housing action plan to identify or really put granular detail on it. And then we'll be working hopefully with the city to see where city staff are at in terms of some of the actions associated with the health and housing action plan, and then where we fit into that mix. So I think that we're empowered to act and speak about the entire, or with the entire community in mind, around creating a shared and achievable vision and to show progress in that regard. That we make the argument as part of the collective of voices that Nanaimo got its justified share of housing and homelessness reduction resources. And I know that there's interesting conversations that are happening, and that's really great to hear. There's also, I think, an argument to be made that Nanaimo was in a very unique situation in Canada. We are seeing a huge influx of to the community. The community itself is geographically very long and thin, 22 kilometers long, is quite a long or a big geographic area to cover when you're dealing with a population of 100,000. And then I think also we can think about how we collectively move to the community towards Yes in My Backyard to addressing homelessness. So we all know what the continuum of housing looks like. I think Nanaimo's pretty good on the two ends, but the middle we're pretty soft on it. There's a lot of home ownership. There's a lot of homelessness services. We need shelters. We need supportive housing. We need social housing. We need below market rental housing. These are all areas To the extent that the SPO is involved in some of these conversations, great. That will emerge over time. What I can say though is that I think if we generate solutions that are local, that's going to be helpful, and if they are innovative and evidence-based is great. We have are operating kind of on 90-day snapshots. So we're in our first 90 days. We're just completing that first cycle. So it's a lot of it has been operational and directional. As we head into the next 180 days, we're building on synergies and moving much more towards developing strategy. I think there's some things about Nanaimo that I think we can really work with, and I've been bullish on this for a while. We have a terrific team at the city, great council. The community agencies are populated by executive directors, at least, who have all been in this role for quite a while. And so we all know each other very well and have worked very well together. So I think this is a very powerful and great time for us to be working on this. We also have, I think, a supportive provincial government, and the changes to the federal government allocation of Reaching Home dollars, at least, to Infrastructure Canada from Employment Services Development Canada, is a very good, I think, trend. There's a lot of good things going on here. At the same time, we need to be very careful and pick wisely, and that comes about as a result of working collectively to make good strategic decisions about how we can have the most impact. So as I said, organizational structure, there has been one motion from council around warming center recommendations. Just want to speak to that, but we have convened a few meetings to date, and we'll be writing a draft recommendations that will bounce back at that collective of community stakeholders, and then we'll need direction from city staff about how we make those recommendations back to council. And then we're working with quite a collection now of the community, quite a sort of a snapshot of the community on a range of projects and activities. So I think what when I put this slide up, and I do so not to say that we're not getting support, but that this is key to our success. From the city's perspective anyway, good information flow of city activities related to the Health and Housing Action Plan is a very important piece. I think that would be referred to as, to a certain extent, some level of transparency or inclusion. And then that we prove as that our promise of being a trusted and equal partner is demonstrated in the work that we do, that we are excellent partners with the city on the work that we've been asked to do, and that we deliver on that work. So ways we can support the city is with recommendations around housing needs, and the sorts of recommendations, things like really having clarity around the number of shelter spaces, where and when, costs and organizations to run them, what the province has done thus far in other communities, and what Nanaimo's need is and how we can address that. And then really in general, helping staff and the city itself to make better arguments about why we need more resources. And similarly with the Snuneymuxw First Nation to strengthen its asks provincially and federally. And just so you know, we are working with the leadership at Snuneymuxw as well. So I guess this is the core of really what we're here for today, is to have a conversation about how best to work with the city, how to track the work of the SPO and the city towards those health and housing action plans. These are at least things we'd like to know. How to inform the city of our activities, and how to make recommendations that are helping us all to generate the best bang for the buck. Okay, so and then just an idea for consideration, just to wrap up, is that in at least two communities that have similar kinds of organizations to the Nanaimo SPO, there's an MOU with the city that's dated to ensure continuity between elected administrations, ensures reciprocity of sharing of information, and is sort of articulates the partnership and the ways that we can work together. So with that, I'll thank you for your time and invite any questions.
Thank you, Mr. McCormick, and we have a few questions coming up. Anything more from you, Dr. Thornton or Don? No?
I just point out one other tentative, I don't know what you call it, strategy, action is between Vancouver Island Regional Library, Island Health. We've had two conversations about the libraries across Vancouver Island serving as some sort of hub for housing and homelessness information. And we're still in the preliminary, but it's, as the head of the library said, everybody can get a library card, not everybody. It's not so easy to get your social insurance number or your passport or whatever, but it's easy to get a library card. Thanks.
Good point, good point. Okay, we'll start with questions. We have, first of all, Mayor Krogh, and then Councillor Manley.
Thank you very much, Chair. And if I may, Mr. McCormick, in your presentation, you mentioned that you thought half of the population of Vancouver Island that's homeless presently is from off Vancouver Island. And as you might guess, you're confronted all the time in the street by people who say, "Oh, they're all from somewhere else. They're not our people. They're all from somewhere else." I'm a bit surprised actually by that, and I just wonder what's the source of that statistic. And can you explain it? I frankly would have assumed that the population who were homeless on the island would have in fact been a higher percentage, that they were islanders as opposed to people who have come here.
Yeah, actually, I think that's what I was trying to say, Mayor Krogh, is that the larger proportion of the population is generated from Vancouver Island, and that our information seems to indicate that there's quite a flow of community members around the region as opposed to just in the city itself. So Andrew can speak in some detail to that, and if you'd like Andrew to add anything to what I've said.
I think what you're saying is that it's a lot more than 50%, not 50%. I think that would be the correct rephrasing.
Yeah.
And it's definitely indicative when you ask people where they're from. They're clearly from around here, they're from around the island. One of the things we're pushing for in the development of our database for coordinated access is to enable it to allow us to track regional data, which of course comes with its complexities around confidentiality and who gets access to what. And the PIC count data is quite clear that, you know, around 75% of people say they've been here at least a year, if not 2 or 5, or, you know, I can.
And if I may, Chair, I mean, one of the explanations that I have given for the numbers that may not have come from our community is the fact is that we are a prison community. And people who are often sent to prison, we know better than half suffer from some form of with mental health issues, often addiction issues. Some of them are already unhoused or close to it when they're imprisoned, and then they're punted off to an institution here. They may be from other parts of the province, and when they're punted out with no supports, there's no place else to go. Is that a fair comment?
Yes, and also it's well understood in the research on homelessness that corrections and foster care, they call it a superhighway into homelessness. And we have high numbers of both in the community, and they're interactional. It's not a one-way street, so to speak. So you are correct would be the answer.
Thank you. And one more thing, if I may, Chair, and the ideas for consideration ensure reciprocal sharing of information. And I want to say this to all three of you. As you're well aware, Council, particularly around many issues, has to operate on an in-camera basis. And I trust you appreciate that will continuously present some challenges in terms of sharing information and being able to perhaps coordinate, if you will, activities or thoughts. But I appreciate the suggestion, but I, from a legal perspective, and I'm looking at Ms. Gurry and our acting CAO and saying that is a difficult proposition. There are things that are publicly discussed in this community unrelated to this issue that we'd all love to talk about, but we can't. And that makes it very hard, and I'm not sure if there is a practical solution that would assist there. And I look to Ms. Gurry and Mr. Harding or anyone else who cares to comment, perhaps.
We really have to get you a mic.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to His Worship. An MOU might be an avenue to get around that. We do have Rise and Report that would allow for certain sharing, but then once you share closed information to some entity, if it's still not public, there's that risk, and we can't always do that either. So I can look into that further, but you're correct. A lot of the closed information until the negotiations happen or until the matter is solved, whatever it is, it's hard to share that information.
You're okay? That's it? Thank you so much. Councillor Manley.
Thank you, Chair. I think actually they're referring to the HIFIS system of integrated coordinated action between all the different organizations. And we have issues around confidentiality when we're sharing information about people that are experiencing homelessness between agencies. So that's the process with the integrated action, which is a really good process to work with. It's the homeless information file system. I'm not sure what HIFIS exactly stands for, but you know, staff members, different staff members, outreach workers will have access to that and be able to share files and track people as they move from community to community to better serve them and find out what their needs are and where they're from and what's going on in their lives. And it's key to really addressing this issue of homelessness. I've just wanted to go back. I know in the previous pit count, it said 75% of people had been in Nanaimo more than 5 years. I thought I'd have to review that. And I was just wondering about the key challenges figures. You mentioned, John, that we've gone from 180 people with chronic homelessness to 500. And that's just kind of a rough number from the pit count? Is that what we're?
Well,
That's where it comes from at this point.
didn't
Yeah.
you say that too, that it had gone up by 20% or so?
From 2020.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Manley?
Yeah. Yeah, I know just from my own experience that we're seeing a lot of people, new people experiencing homelessness, and a lot of them are people on fixed incomes who have just lost their home for no fault of their own. And it includes a lot of seniors and people with disabilities. And anybody on a fixed income is at risk in this community unless they've already got a subsidized place that's well established where they don't need to fear rent evictions or other activities like that. So thank you for the presentation. I'm really looking forward to seeing the statistics from the pit count. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Manley. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. My question is along the lines of Councillor Manley. When you're tracking these, are you looking at the number of people that have been impacted by rent evictions? Is that something that we could go to the SPO to find out about?
So you're asking us what we do or what happens in the pit count?
No, what I'm asking is, are you tracking the number of people that have become homeless because of rent evictions?
Not at the moment, although that would be a fairly tricky ask. I would say we could try to do it for sure.
Yeah.
It's in the pit counts. It's a question that's asked, but again, it's self-reporting. It's not data that comes directly from landlords or directly from BC Housing.
Yeah, but it's no different either than when they say they're from here, having lots of experience. I know a lot of them are told to say that they're from here when they're really not. And when you run their names, you find out very fast that they're not from here. But I'm just thinking, because that could be a tool that could help us if we start looking at issues of rent evictions, which I understand in this community is becoming quite an issue. So I'm just wondering if that information could help us formulate some basis to address it. That's all. Thank you.
Next question, Councillor Gesselbrook. Oh, hold on, Councillor Gesselbrook. Mr. McCormick, did you want to respond to that question?
I did just want to add to that very importantly, and thanks for that question, Councillor Armstrong. Very importantly, the implementation that Councillor Manley was speaking about of it's called the the Homelessness Individuals and Families Information System, HIFIS, is really important. This is why it's so important that we implement it, is because it helps us to get real-time, almost real-time data, as much as we can get agencies to participate in it. And it'll give us a bit of a clearer picture about where people are coming from. The pit count is a blunt tool. It's a blunt instrument, and it gives us snapshots every couple of years. It simply isn't enough. It's not timely enough. And to your point, it really doesn't give us a sort of a surgical understanding of where things are at in terms of specific questions like that. We may actually, as I'm thinking about it too, be able to use some big data that we have available through Help Seeker, which was the organization that Dr. Alina Turner fronts that helped us with the Health and Housing Task Force to do some of that work as well. Although that's a question we can ask and come back to you with an answer.
Thank you. I just think it's very important because we have a tendency to be focusing mostly on those with mental health and addiction. And I believe there's a very large number of people that are falling through the cracks because of financial or not being able to get large enough homes for families or kids, or we've got like 4 people living in a 1-bedroom apartment. So I'm very interested in that type of stuff because I think we've put a lot of government dollars into addictions and mental health, but we're missing that for the person that's just doesn't have the money. Thanks.
If we could go on, Don Bonner would like to respond.
Thank you, Chair. And this might be one of the ideas, I'm just ballparking here, is how we can work together, is that any renoviction requires a renovation, which requires a building permit. So there's information around, and I think that looking at ways of how can we quantify that might be an option going forward.
Excellent, excellent. Councillor Gesselbrook next, and then Councillor, I'm just going to say Councillor Hillary, Councillor Eastmere, and then Councillor Emmons. Councillor Gesselbrook.
Thanks, Chair. I think the idea of an MOU is an interesting one, and would be an interesting exercise. Just really provide clarity of roles and expectations, and then really looking at information sharing, because there are numerous occasions, and from my understanding, a reason why the SPO was put into place was to help provide that sort of systems planning. Almost, in short-term situations, it's almost verges on operational. But, the example that comes to mind is when there was a request for more money for a shower program or shelter. I can't recall the exact detail of it. Our move as council was to say, well, let's refer to the SPO and see what's needed. And so having that ability to look at what are the needs and having service agency providers coming to the SPO and providing this is what we need, and that being the conduit to the city to assess, where's the appropriate place for this funding coming from and what exactly do we need, and having that systems perspective is a huge role of it. And, the reason why we set up the SPO was to have a greater level of trust and continuity as an organization that's arm's length from the city. And so if there is a barrier for them to be operating in that way, it begs the question, why didn't we just do this in-house? And so I'm hoping in the MOU that will be explored, that any barriers to that are overcome, because I think we're in a critical time here where, the SPO is empowered and able to do his job, or, we're gonna have to reflect on this entire exercise. And so I guess that's really a comment that I wanted to make. One question I do have to our presenters is just on, there was mention of looking at doing a strategic engagement with stakeholders. And I do know a lot of time and energy was put into the homelessness action plan, which was quite extensive in terms of engagement and a plan was created. Do you see the potential engagement that you hinted at as being additional to that and building off of that initial document, or a new engagement? And in terms of the aspects of the vision that's missing, could you just expand on that in terms of what we do need to be looking at? I guess my tendency is starting a whole nother process of engagement where we should just focus on sort of the operational execution end of things. So I'll leave that to you.
I'm just going to tell everybody, we've gone a long time, so we're just going to try and keep these answers as short as we can, and we can bring this topic back up at another time, but I'll let you, Mr. McCormick, respond.
Thank you. It's going to build on the Health and Housing Action Plan, get more granular, and work us towards a clear vision of where we want to get to in 5 years' time, or 10 years' time, or 15 to 20 years' time. So the idea is that we're not going over ground that we've already covered. We are fleshing it out and giving it more color and operationalizing it, to your point, to use the language that you use. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Eastmere.
Yeah, I appreciate the chance to ask questions about this because I think the work of the SPO is so important, and I think we are keen to get more clarity around the work that's happening. So I'm really glad this is happening during the GPC, where we do have more time to discuss and hear more full answers, recognizing we have a long agenda, but I just think this is a really important subject, and we're all really invested in seeing some results from this. I'm just wondering how the SPO is feeling about what council has asked of them so far. A few months ago, we supported a motion asking for some assistance around the siting of warming centers. So I'm just sort of keen to see how that, hear how that process is going so far, if you do have an update. And also, at our last meeting, there was unanimous support for a motion to extend funding for a breakfast program for 4 months that's serving unhoused residents. And council is going to consider funding for a more permanent meal program as part of the 2024 budget. And I'm just wondering, I know that staff said they would reach out to you on that subject as well, and sort of looking for that expertise that can be offered. And I'm wondering if you're feeling well positioned to advise on those matters, and what sort of tangible role the SPO can play in assisting to plan and coordinate a more sustainable approach to these challenges at this time.
Short answer, right?
Short answer,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, no, I'll do my best, Councillor Eastmere. On the warming center, as I think I mentioned, we have had 3 meetings as a collective of agencies, city, I think Island Health is part of that as well. And so we are very close to coming back to you with recommendations. We just need some direction about how we do that so that I can work with staff about that. So we feel comfortable with that process, and I think we're gonna, these are opportunities for us to sort of dip our toes in and get used to the process itself and get comfortable with that process. On the second piece around the breakfast program, we haven't actually spoken with staff yet. But we would be comfortable to have that conversation, and I think that just sort of generally, we are working as a trusted partner with the city, but we're also working as a trusted partner with the community, with community agencies. We don't have any baggage. There's no, long-standing relationships, and so there's no, there's no lingering anythings at this point. And as I've said, we really convene a table and we create a space that we hope is everyone feels safe in, and that can help us all to sort of collectively move along. Certainly our earliest experience, which is in this first 3 months, is that there's a lot of encouragement about what we're doing, and there seems to be an openness to work together. So I'm optimistic, and I expect that would continue to be the case. Thank you.
Thank you both. Councillor Hemmons and then Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I have a few questions. I'll try to be speedy, but this is the first time with a major initiative. So
well, and this is so interesting. I'm wondering if we shouldn't bring this back to the month like September. We don't have any of these meetings. This might be worthy of another meeting, but let's see where it goes today.
Yeah, possibly. Okay, thank you. So I just want to paint the picture of system coordination, this term that we keep passing around, and really frame it up as this idea that we discovered during the Health and Housing Task Force, that we have millions of dollars coming into the community that isn't perhaps well coordinated to best serve the population that we're trying to serve. So, and that's nobody's fault. It's that this funding often comes through piecemeal things. So a bit of food funding, a bit of housing funding, a bit of shelter funding. The the thrust of the Health and Housing Task Force the thrust of the systems planning organization that came from the Health and Housing Task Force was really to provide coordination around those millions of dollars that are coming in, and talking about, you know, the 8 providers that are providing food and, you know, all those things. So can I just get a high-level update from the executive director? How are we doing on that? What's the reception from the community? And do you see us making strides in the near future?
Mr. McCormick?
Thank you, Councillor Hemmens. So far, the conversation around any conversations we've had around funding have been through Reaching Home, and we are. I think we're going to be facilitating the CAB meetings, the Community Advisory Board meetings in the fall that are required for the development of they call it a community plan, but it's really a Reaching Home community plan for how to distribute those funds. And I think that the conversation is going to be much more about strategic rather than just iterative amounts of money going to the same agencies. I think that we want to have a collective conversation, and it seems like there's an appetite for this, to have a collective conversation that is much more targeted on the few things that we can do very well that can make the most impact. So that might be hard in some cases. Hard decisions may need to be made around funds that have traditionally gone certain places that may not end up going there in the future. So that's the opening conversation around that. And I can't say that we've been involved in other conversations to do with the coordination of funds at this point, but I would expect that we would be and will be.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. My next question, in the presentation there is a bullet saying guide the strategic use of housing-related funding. Could I have an explanation of that, please?
That would be an example, would be the Reaching Home dollars that are coming into the community.
Okay. And what kind of conversations are you having with the business community, and do you have connections with the Prosperity Corporation?
With the business community, we've met with the Mid-Island Business Initiative, MIBI. We've also met with developers and are involved in conversations that they are interested in having around sprung buildings and the challenges faced around building supportive housing. So we're having those kind of conversations. I think we haven't had yet and need to do is have a conversation with, at least starting conversation with the Chamber of Commerce and see where that takes us, as well as the downtown business BIA. Okay. And then others as well who are interested in meeting with us. There's I think a really important role for the business community though in addressing housing and homelessness. Certainly developers have a big role to play.
I think Don Bonner wanted to ask a question or respond to the question.
Just quickly in that there's a seat on our board for the Nanaimo Prosperity Corporation. Hasn't filled yet, that I did reach out to the new executive director of the chamber and reminded her that we're still missing somebody. So hopefully that will come to us very soon.
Excellent.
Okay, thank you. And final question, around the MOU, ensuring reciprocal sharing of information, can you tell me about the barriers you're currently facing that MOU would smooth out?
I think I think it's just a matter of time. I think we're in such early days that the understanding of what we are involved in or not involved in is part of an emerging process. And so I think that over the past couple of months, I've seen that cycle of us being included in information sharing and conversations starting to ramp up, and as recently as this past week. I'd like to think that we would be included more often than not, but as Mayor Krogh has indicated, there's going to be times where we're not, for very good reasons. But I trust that the city will make those decisions based on the legal requirements to do so, and not because we're forgotten or not because we haven't really provided some value for money. So our job is to make sure that when we're asked that we provide great value for money, and then hopefully the city thinks of us as a trusted partner and wants us to be involved when it makes sense.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hemmens. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the presenters. I think I just want to pick up on a theme or a thread from Councillor Guestbrook and Councillor Hemmons. I was just a little, I'm not having the clarity around sort of working with partners to develop a plan, what that actually means. I'll admit I'm always a little concerned when I hear make plans and what sounds like make committees, because, you know, I thought of going back some of the work that's been done. I'm kind of like, okay, I thought we were past that point, and we're going to be getting to, and the purpose of the SBO was more of an implementation tool. So I'm looking for a little clarity to maybe alleviate my concerns.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. I think that you know, we can be a point for decisions that are made collectively, but we aren't going to necessarily run off and do things without the collective engagement in that process. So we're just really cognizant that we want to engage the community in any work that we do. We are supportive and directive at the same time. We don't want to be independent of the work and actions of the collective of stakeholders. And so it's important that we're presenting information and getting feedback. That we're, for example, with the work in the fall that I was talking to Councillor Gesselbrecht about, we're responding to about, that is really to put some meat on the bones of the Health and Housing Action Plan, so we can actually put some actions in place. The Health and Housing Action Plan is good, but it's lofty, and so it's something that requires real actions attached to it. So we use it as a guiding document, but we're not using it as anything more than that. We have to actually put granular actions in place that are going to allow us to move forward as a collective. We're not delivering any programming. We are coordinating, facilitating research, collective or organizational structure, and the agencies that are doing the work, they need to be committed and they need to be involved. And so if they're not interested in doing that work, we can't make them. They are driven by contracts and they're driven by funding. So we have to work with them to make sure that this fits into their mandates collectively or individually, and then help them to get the resources in place that they need. And that's our job, partner. Thank you.
Councillor Brown, any more questions?
That was my only question. Thanks, Chair, and thanks, John.
Thank you. Councillor Gesselbrook, your hand is up. Was that just a layover, or did you wish to?
Layover, thank you.
Thank you so much. You know, this is, it's such a big topic, but today's presentation definitely helps to make it a little more clear, particularly for those of us who are new and still trying to navigate through all of this. But, and you know, I agree, Mr. McCormick, that when you talked about the loftiness of this plan, we have to at least start with lofty and work towards it. So I'm very impressed. So thank you, Mr. McCormick. Thank you, Dr. Thornton, and Dawn Bonner. So good to have you back. Thank you as well. And if there's nothing else, we'll go on to the next session. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, going on to, in the report, letter B, connected to Nanaima under the parking bylaw exemption, to be introduced by Bill Sims, our General Manager of Engineering and Public Works. Mr. Sims.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Council. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. So it's all fun transportation all the time this afternoon. I hope we've got a number of issues, and we thought bundling them sometimes just gets the sort of what's the right word? Creative juices going, I guess.
Okay, good.
So just briefly, I'll introduce the first subject, which is around, as you noted, the parking bylaw exemption program. And the city has $374 million in roads infrastructure. And so that's, you know, the general taxpayers of the entire community pay for that road infrastructure. And part of the function of road infrastructure is parking, as you know. And so this is a city asset that's paid for by all, and it's used by a majority of folks, and but not everyone. So the magic around parking is all about turning over and keeping it sort of lively, especially in areas like downtown or areas of higher density. And as the city grows and as we want to see increased densification, there's going to be greater demand. At the same time, we're starting to see, culturally, across North America, a shift in modes, a reduction in car use. We hope, the city's plan speaks to that largely, but we're never going to see the demise of the car, if I can use that. It's always going to be an integral part of life in Nanaimo, especially if you've got your kids enrolled in a soccer program at Bevan and you live in the south end or the north end, for example. The intent of Mr. Zare's presentation is really around sort of reporting out on the work that was done in 2019 as our downtown parking study. That was a fairly major effort, and it's been sort of sitting at the sidelines waiting for a good opportunity to come back. So, and then we've got a report, and then Mr. Rose can speak, which Mr. Rose will speak to, and the commentary in the report is around congregate care facilities, but it really could apply to parking in general as a principled approach, rather than just one particular land use. So one of the things that you'll see in the recommendation that I wanted to just maybe highlight a little bit was staff's put forward a comment about City of Vancouver's parking demand management tools, or a toolkit. And I sort of liken this to water conservation. So it's the kind of thing that you put in play. Demand management, you have to have an adequate supply, yes, but you also have to use it wisely. And I think that parking demand management is similar. But without further ado, we're here all afternoon. Don't go away. Try the veal. Mr. Zare from McElhaney will take you through. And this is really intended just to kind of provide some context around parking. Thanks, Chair.
Mr. Zare?
Thank you.
Nice to have you here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, Your Worship, Councillors. It's my pleasure. So yeah, my name is Patrick Zare. I'm a civil engineer at McElhaney. We've worked with the city over the last several years on a range of projects, including the Downtown Nanaimo Mobility Hub, where we completed some of these parking inventories. We'll talk a little bit about that. So what we're going to cover today, a few different topics. One, we'll just do a bit of a background on parking, best practices for parking, why we have parking, the purpose and benefit it brings to the community. We'll talk about lessons learned, drawing from some other communities in BC, how they've managed parking, some of the trends we're seeing that other municipalities are moving towards. Then we'll talk about past studies, that work completed in 2019, and what kind of conclusions we drew from that, maybe anything that's changed. We'll talk about future changes in the city that may impact this work, changes to infrastructure, changes to land use, things that drive parking demand and use. And then finally, we'll talk briefly about sort of recommendations for next steps. Yeah, so we had a bit of an introduction earlier, but why do we have parking? Well, parking is infrastructure. As mentioned, it's part of that inventory of public roads and services people use. And we have that, we pay for it through taxes and other methods because it brings a value to our communities. If you're visiting a business, if you're visiting family, if you're needing to stop places, parking allows you to do that. Sometimes it's convenient. For some users, it's very essential. If you need accessible parking, maybe because other modes of transportation don't allow you to go where you're going to go. And the city, again, as mentioned, spends money to provide this parking, whether on street because it's part of the road infrastructure that we build, or whether it's off street because the city owns that.
Oh, small print.
I'll try and explain it well.
Okay.
So yeah, who's our parking for? Well, I think the biggest divide is between on-street and off-street parking. So on-street parking, and speaking here primarily about areas in commercial zones, this is parking that's really convenient. If you're parking right outside the restaurant or the store, this is something that really helps you, be a patron of that business. In residential areas, there's also, there's on-street parking as well, and that's a bit different. That's lower turnover, longer durations. But generally, when we talk about on-street parking, we're talking about areas that are of higher convenience where there's a bit of a premium. Of course, then we also have off-street parking. This could be parking on an individual property, which is generally privately owned, or it could be off-street in a parkade owned by the city or another operator. So this is parking. People tend to be staying longer, a day or more, and it's not as convenience-oriented. One really important thing to think about with parking is occupancy, is how busy is that parking. On the one hand, if parking is full, that means it's being well used, but it does mean that nobody else can use it. So there's a sort of a fine balance there where we want the parking to be used, but we want it to be just empty enough that people can use it. So 85% is often a number that gets thrown around. That kind of translates on average to about one open spot per block. It means that if you're driving around, you can park right away. You're not burning gas, putting CO2 in the atmosphere, just circling the block. So how do we influence this? Well, parking occupancy is a function of the supply of parking relative to its demand. And the city has tools to manage both of those. So on the demand side, there's a whole range of toolkits that have been developed. City of Vancouver's was mentioned. Cost is obviously the most obvious of these. You can put a price on parking. If parking costs more, people may choose not to park. You can also put a time limit. That's often desirable, especially in areas of high convenience. We want patrons to visit businesses, but we want as many patrons as possible to visit a business. We want that parking to turn over. The other sort of indirect tool would be like land use availability alternatives. If there's better transit, denser land uses, people might not need to drive as much. Supply side is probably a simpler lever that just functions purely as a result of how much parking there is. On-street parking is quite straightforward. There's not too many ways to configure that. This most often gets addressed through bylaws with zoning requirements if you have parking minimums. We'll talk about that briefly in a sec. And then just in general, I think there's a number of values that are important to keep in mind when you talk about parking, what we want parking to be. We want it to be safe and secure. People feel comfortable leaving their vehicles, feel comfortable entering and exiting facilities. It should be understandable and easy to use. You want to know where you can park. If you're going to be parked illegally, clarity signs. You go to some cities and they have 4 different signs in one post. It can be a little difficult to decipher. And it should be reliable. That kind of plays into occupancy, but hopefully people get a general sense over time of where they can park, and you don't end up with a lot of people circling around looking for a spot. So our past work has included a bit of a looking at other cities in BC, some of the lessons they've learned recently about parking. We're just going to talk pretty high level here, but so there's Kelowna. Kelowna has recently done some work on parking, coming up with a parking strategy. That work has included looking into pricing, understanding how much to charge for how long, does that price change throughout the day or dynamically throughout the year, different options for payment. Is it coins in a meter? Is it through an app? Is there a credit card payment processor? And then information availability. Through the website, through apps, are there ways that you can tell people where the parking is so that they're encouraged to go places and they can easily find a parking spot? Penticton was another city explored in our study. They've had some interesting approaches. So Penticton has car share now. They've been looking at providing spots for car share on and off street. They've also, like Kelowna, come up with an overall strategy to guide their work. And then we'll talk about this just in a sec here, but like many cities, Penticton has looked at how much parking is required for residential uses. Is that something that's dictated by the city to make sure there's enough parking, prevent spillover onto streets, or is it something that the market decides? Yeah, so parking minimums is sort of the term referred to when we have bylaws that say how much parking is provided for given land use. This is typically expressed as a rate. So per 1,000 square feet of office space or per unit or per bedroom of housing, we say how many parking stalls there are. And one challenge is this imposes a cost on development and certainly does drive sort of an auto-centric view. In sort of current trends, there's a very famous book called The High Cost of Free Parking that speaks to this. And if you've read the news, you've probably seen different articles about this around the province. That headline on the top right is from Burnaby. There's a tower going in now. It's a very tall tower. It has a lot of units. And so applying Burnaby's parking law, I don't know what the exact rate is, but it does result in a 14-story underground parkade, which is a very significant structure. And it is right next to a SkyTrain station. It's driven a lot of debate about what is the appropriate amount of parking to provide. Yeah, so we'll speak now about the results of our past work and what the city has. So again, the city has a wide range of parking. The city has on-street parking. The city has off-street parkades. Some of that is owned by the city, some of it is private. It's both paid and free. And then there are sort of special cases. Loading zones, taxi zones, there's a hotel loading zone downtown and commercial, there's motorcycle parking, there's accessible parking. So our work in 2019 drew a fairly large box from the downtown area and conducted an inventory of this parking to better understand how much it was being used. I apologize, this graphic is a bit hard to decipher, but the point is that there's on-street parking on a wide range of city streets. There's sort of the hatch shaded areas showing off-street parkades of various types and sizes. And then the point here is not to illustrate a specific street or inventory. It is color-coded, so green were streets where there was a low occupancy of parking, not very many cars parked relative to the availability of spaces. The red areas indicating that you're fairly busy. Most spaces are occupied. Sorry. And I guess one of the key results of this inventory is generally that across the downtown area, there was sufficient parking inventory. We don't see consistent capacity crunches or unavailability of parking. The challenge that gets presented is more one of wayfinding, of folks finding the right spot to park. It's not that there isn't a spot, it's just that that spot needs to be found. So there were some other sort of general recommendations from that study at the time. Increasing enforcement. If you want people to sort of obey the rules, there has to be sort of a credible enforcement of those rules. Wayfinding, again, real-time information, enabling people to find open spots. An event strategy, which I understand has been worked on, I think implemented so far. Improved lighting and security at parkades. Better understanding the impacts of future downtown developments. And again, overall, perhaps exploring a broader parking policy to understand how parking is implemented in the city. So there's a lot of things happening downtown, which is great and exciting, and these all have the potential to impact how parking is used. So Terminal Avenue, that work is just starting now. There's the Transit Exchange, which is not too far off. And there's also Commercial Street, which will happen in a series of phases, but we can see the whole project here, and will impact sort of the land use, encourage people to visit. Yeah, and on that land use sort of specifically, just even close to downtown, there's the A&B Sound Building, the Gene Burns Street right across the street, and 77 Chapel Street, which is a parkade now, but as I understand, there are prospects in the future. This graphic was also provided to us by the city, just again showing just the wide range of projects and development in the pipeline in the area. We tried to keep this very high level. But ultimately, past work has identified there needs to be a better clarity and sort of uniformity of policy implementation around parking. The supply itself is not a concern at this time, but for that to continue to function smoothly and effectively, we need to ensure that users can quickly and easily get to parking spots. To that end, it's recommended that a parking strategy be created to sort of guide this work, and that would consider a number of key elements. Pricing of parking, if it is priced, how it's priced, enforcement, wayfinding, security, implementation of supply and demand management tools, and finally, on the city's sort of staff end, the operational considerations to make sure that gets implemented effectively. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Okay, hold on. We'll see if there's any questions. Councillor Armstrong to start.
Thank you. This is one that I brought forward a couple times. It still doesn't address what I'm looking for. I'm not looking at the congregate housing. I'm looking for those with disabilities and seniors and all those issues. There's presently 2 cases in human rights tribunals as well as Supreme Court of Canada where it's now being taken at that by not providing parking for seniors, whatever, that it's discriminatory. One was founded, so I think we need to look at those new cases to see how that plays out. I know that Berwick-on-the-Lake is now having to put in a parkade because they are no longer, where they provide on-care site. They're just going to seniors, so they've had to add more. I take a look at what happened on our Prideaux Street one, where we've had 72 people that lived there send us a petition that there was not enough parking. You can't presume because people are poor that they don't have cars. Quite often it's the actual opposite. And we saw that with the Prideaux Street site where they only provided 16 parking. People can't walk. The other issue I have with this is we're assuming disability. A lot of people can't walk far distances, but they don't qualify as disabled. So I'm really struggling with this because it's not going to address the issues that have been brought forward to us by the seniors, especially the ones on Selby. I went there and I spoke with, I think there was like about 15 or 20 people there. They all have disabilities. They can't walk the distance. They're forced to park on the streets. Even the disabled parking lots are too small. Now I just read another one that's going to the Human Rights Tribunal that we're not making the parking spaces wide enough for those with disabilities, as well as older people. So it's older people that are challenging it. So I would like to see all those looked at when we come back. To me, it's very important. I take a look at what's happened up by Dodds Furniture, where we can't even get fire trucks down that street because everybody's parking on both sides of the streets. I know bylaws are there regularly, police are there regularly, the fire department has complained, all going back to our policies of not providing enough parking. We're not going to force people out of their cars. As much as we want to try, we're not going to do it. Take a look at Toronto now, where their transit is down by 30%, even taking into account COVID, because of the crime associated with transit. A lot of older people and younger people don't want to take it. So I think we live in this world where we're trying to legislate people out of their cars, and I don't believe it's going to happen. There was just the shooting in Montreal where the young girl got shot and killed over a parking dispute. We see that in Burnaby. It's in the papers all the time. So I think it's something we have to really look at. As much as people don't agree with it, people aren't going to get out of their cars, and we need to find a way. I understand the one spot in Toronto that went to no parking had to go buy a parking lot because people weren't buying in there because people have cars. So I think we need to really look at it further. I would like it, I would, instead of saying seniors congregate housing, I'd rather it where any seniors reside or, low income, because they're the ones that are being impacted by it. It's not the people with money, it's the people with low incomes that are really impacted by our parking bylaws. Thank you.
Maybe what we'll do then is we'll just go through the questions first and then come back to a possible recommendation. Mr. Zer, did you want to respond to Councillor Armstrong? Mr. Sims, sorry.
Chair, thank you, Chair. And through you to Councillor Armstrong's point, I think really Mr. Zer's presentation was around the reporting out and just some of the basics around parking. And this, I'd ask Mr. Rose to speak specifically to the report, which will hopefully speak to some of the comments that, so this was more of a general high-level view and just looking back at what our downtown parking is.
So it's not the one that I've asked for, the report I've been asking for?
The report is, the presentation wasn't. The presentation was really about setting up the...
Yeah, I'm not concerned about downtown. I'm concerned about the residents that keep complaining that they can't park any place and they're getting the tickets and they can't afford the tickets.
Right. The intent of the presentation was to provide just a basic understanding of why do we have parking bylaws as an example.
Okay, thank you.
So and I'll ask Mr. Rose to step through the report and speak to some of those options. Thanks, Councillor Armstrong.
Did you want to have more questions, Mr. Rose, or did you want to respond to that? No?
Thanks, Chair. So again, this is just really was Mr. Zer's presentation is sort of the back to basics piece.
Okay.
And Mr. Rose will speak hopefully just to take you through the report and hopefully address Councillor Armstrong's questions and concerns.
Did you wish to have the other questions at this time? We have two other councillors waiting.
If there's any other questions for Mr. Zer on the basics of the parking and the work that he did downtown, I'm sure he'd be happy to take them, or Mr. Rose can also address them as well.
Okay, so I'll go to Councillor Thorpe. Do you have a question that you wanted to ask Mr. Zer?
I don't have a specific question for the presenter. I appreciate the report, Mr. Zer. Thank you. This is a hot topic in my mind, and I do have some commentary that I would like to add to the discussion, but it does not have to be at this point.
Okay, so we'll come back to you. Thank you, Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Chair. I believe this question is for Mr. Zer, but please feel free to say it's in the next portion. I'm really curious about, you showed the book, The High Cost of Free Parking. Is there a clear correlation between reducing parking minimums and a reduced price of housing? That might be an unfair question for an engineer.
Well, I think it's obviously what goes into the price of housing is a very complicated question. I think parking can be a contributing factor in areas with underground parking garages. A parking stall can cost tens of thousands of dollars to provide, and that can drive the cost of the construction of the unit. But I would be very hesitant to speak about too direct of a correlation because it obviously is a very complicated relationship.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to pass that one on to staff in the next discussion.
Thank you. I'm so sorry, Mr. Mayor. I neglected you. Sorry about that. You had a question for Mr. Zer.
No apology needed, Chair. Thank you. Just referencing one of the comments, parking supply not a concern at this time, but management required to allow for continued effectiveness as the supply city grows. That comment, is that in reference to what we'll think of as trouble spots downtown, or is it in reference to specific areas? In other words, is the supply fine? But I mean, if there's lots of supply downtown, that's one thing. But is it in the end of the downtown that's appropriate? I just want to get some idea of what that comment actually means when it says the supply is not a concern.
Mr. Rose?
Through the chair. So I think it's fair to say that Mr. Zara's presentation was in the context of downtown. And I would say it's fairly fair to say that downtown is our highest concentration of parking. We have similar circumstances around the university and around the hospital, both of which we've used street regulations to manage that. I think as a city as a whole, we probably have quite a bit of parking capacity, but we do also have hotspots where, you know, there's a block or there's a 2 or 3 block area where if you look back at the map, and again, not detailed, but you can see bars of red, and there is consistent high demand in these areas. And this is where we need to look at these areas, whether it's downtown or across the city, and sort of question, is this functioning in the best interest of the community, or should we introduce some sort of parking regulations? Seasonally, we see challenges down towards the ferry terminal as well. People park there for the weekend or try to. They usually come home to a coupon. And so this is where I think looking forward, we need to have a more comprehensive look at our perspective on parking across the city, understanding that some areas have a great deal of capacity, other areas do not. And touching back to Councillor Hemmons' question, there's a bit of a give and take on parking requirements versus housing. And so this is something that we need to navigate, and it's not a black and white question, it's a very sticky question because it's change management. And we need to understand what the community's priorities are, and we can navigate forward from that.
Okay. Councillor Armstrong, did I see your hand up? No. Thank you. So now, Mr. Rose, did you want to take it from here? Mr. Sims, I'll let you two guide us from this point.
Sure.
Mr. Zir, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was great. Thank you.
So we have tried to answer this question previously, and I think each time we've realized that we haven't shared enough information or included enough information. And I think that the question that we're trying to struggle with is, how do we equitably balance off parking capacity in tight areas? And so when we look at some of the policies and the goals that we've outlined in City Plan, we see this trend away from personal vehicle ownership. We also see objectives to try and make housing more affordable and more accessible to more people. And so, as we touch on in the report, there is a cost associated with parking. There's a cost associated with car ownership. And as Mr. Sims said, Nanaimo is not a non-car community. It's very linear. We don't have a complete walking, biking system. Our transit system is just in the foundational stages of building into a first class. And so we know we have a lot of work to go. But what we've tried to, or what I've tried to outline in this report is that for folks who do not have a high travel demand, there may be alternatives that may be more financially acceptable. And so they do have some trade-offs with respect to convenience. And in some areas that's greater, in some areas it's less. And so this combination of elements I've tried to present in a package to support an understanding of how we can manage this interest or potentially explore another alternative. We are open to a different directive if council would like us to explore something.
Okay. Are you ready for questions?
Yep.
Councillor Thorpe to start.
Well, thank you, Chair, very much. And again, I apologize ahead of time. I don't really have a question. I just have some comments that I'd like to make, and I didn't want to attack the messenger. Mr. Zer's report was fine. Thank you very much again for that. Mr. Rose's analogy between our goal of creating or making housing more affordable and comparing that with reducing people's dependence on cars, I thought was probably very apt, because I think both are beyond our scope and not realistic. No offense. The city is not going to be able to make housing more affordable without giving some incentives, and we're not going to reduce people's dependency on the automobile. Our population, as we know, is growing tremendously quickly, and even faster than the rate of people coming to our city is the number of automobiles coming to our city. And the latest study, which has not changed over 15 years, is that 86% of daily trips in the city are made via automobile. I really appreciated Mr. Zer's comment that parking is infrastructure. And I would suggest, therefore, that our infrastructure growth in terms of parking has in no way kept up with the increased demand over the years. We increase our infrastructure for pipes and sewers and so on. What have we done for parking? We've tried to discourage it, that's all. So we're not keeping pace, and we need more physical spaces for parking. We give variances to developers to encourage housing, and therefore people are forced to park on the street. And maybe not in every neighborhood that's a problem, but growingly it's a huge problem. We have cars parked on both sides of many streets to the point where it's inhibiting access for emergency vehicles in some cases. Look at the hospital district, which has long had a huge problem with parking. We have festivals every week in July downtown at Maffeo Sutton Park, and people attempt to attend and they get turned away at the entry to the park because they're told, sorry, there's no parking. So where do they go? On-street parking, I think we need more spaces, and I don't know how we accommodate that. And off-street parking, we need more spaces. We're losing parking facilities downtown, and I think Mr. Zer recognized that in his report. So to say that parking supply is not a concern, as the mayor pointed out a minute ago, I take issue with that. Again, no offense, I think it is a concern. I think it's a growing concern, and I think we need to seriously address the reality of the fact that we need to be prepared to supply some answer to people who are still going to be driving cars, whether they're electric or self-propelled or whatever. They need a place to go and park. And if they don't have it, we're going to drive people away from our downtown, away from our neighborhoods, away from our city. So that's my little rant, and I don't expect an answer to that, but I feel better for having said it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thorpe, Councillor Hemmens, and then Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I go back to my initial question. So I can reasonably say to a resident, you're going to have to deal with parking issues because you got housing that was below market. So can I have some affirmation from anyone at the table that by reducing parking requirements for developers, they are able to reduce the cost of that housing to our residents?
Mr. Lindsay?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I'll do my best, and I would, in simple terms, I would suggest we look at our parking bylaw, which in many areas of the city for residential will require anywhere from 1 to 2 parking spaces per unit. So if we think about, and some of the numbers that are often thrown around are $10,000 for a surface parking stall, and I'm even hearing numbers up to $50,000 for underground parking stalls for each of those stalls. So it's pretty easy to see how quickly, even if they're surface parking stalls, those costs can add to the units. There's 2 things though. It's not only the cost that you're adding to the units, but if you think about historically the pattern of requiring surface parking for each use, not just residential, you can look around the city and you can see many properties that 50% or more of the surface area of that property is used for parking, which means the overall amount of development that you can get on the remainder is significantly less. So not only, I think, does it add cost to the units, but it limits the ability to add new units. Now, and I think, to be fair, I think I've heard councillors raise a number of points around this. One of the things we're seeing right now is we believe right-sizing the amount of parking, but we're seeing groups which are investors which are charging additional for their parking beyond rental rates, which is putting pressure on that public resource of public parking in and around locations. So that is certainly an issue. Parking is on the site, but it's not being used, in our opinion, because of the cost, and it's pushing people out into the public street and adding to the challenge of parking that's intended to be for everyone. So.
Councillor Hammonds?
Thank you. If I may, another.
Sure.
I'd just like to know the process of how our system works. So we have a number of 2-hour resident exempt zones in the city. Do we register people's license plates? And when we have bylaws go around, are people checking? Like, how are we managing that? And isn't it reasonable? My next step is it reasonable to put that process that already exists in the city in place and not the hot spots? Downtown is always going to be a hot spot for parking, I think, but the places around the seniors' facilities. Is that possible to replicate that program so seniors have access to parking that they can rely on?
Mr. LaBerge?
Yeah, thank you. Through Madam Chair, we do have residential resident parking pass system, but it's very cumbersome. We require residents to send in their tombstone data and their registration every year, and we put it in databases. So as we expand to more neighborhoods, the university, the hospital area, we have one parking clerk that administers all of that. So we do it kind of in a really high demand type situation. At this point, it's actually easier for us to cancel tickets of residents that receive tickets into our zones than it is to register everybody. And if we were to start rolling out more, then we'd have to have more administrative support to make it feasible.
So it's under-resourced in order to run to its full capacity?
As I said, we have we have a full-time parking clerk who almost full-time administers the downtown parkades, et cetera. The resident exempt neighborhoods, we don't really actively register many residents except in the most dense, busy neighborhoods, and there are very few at this point. We're going to start with pay parking in the hospital area in the fall, and we're anticipating that this is going to be a tremendous strain on our existing resources.
Okay, thank you.
Just to add to that question, Mr. LaBerge, so those who have, I'm not even sure how to say it, you don't just give them a pass like what we had at the hospital. I used to have a pass that I bought and used, but you don't have that for residences that are...
That is correct. There's no actual permit that's given. When we do register vehicles and we'll put in our license plate recognition systems, then we are aware of their local residents. But the reality is, with a lot of these neighborhoods, there's such tremendous turnover. There's a lot of rental suites, and it's such a dynamic situation. As I say, at this point, we find it simpler to simply cancel tickets that are issued if they can demonstrate their residence than it is to try to administer a program or register the entire neighborhood.
Okay. It was just that Mr. Zier talked about a program out of Penticton, and I've witnessed that, where people have their own tags that they put on their rear view mirror, and then they can park. But I can imagine. So you're okay with that? Okay, next is Councillor Armstrong and then Councillor Manley.
Thank you. I do want to take issue with one thing. Car ownership is actually on the rise, not according to the research I did, not the other way around. Also, when we say we pay a lot of extra for gas infrastructure, so people that are driving do pay extra versus those that don't. Plus, we also subsidize the transit system. So I think it's not fair to really compare that when transit is heavily, heavily subsidized. But my big issue, I checked in, I knew Councillor Hammonds would ask that question, so I looked at Toronto where there's parking and non-parking, they're the same price. Condos are going for the same price, so I don't believe that when we say that the developers are going to pass on the savings, they haven't been. They're in the money, they're in the business to make money, and they're charging them the same price, so I don't believe that's accurate. I take a look at the Bluestone, which is the one up by Dodds, where, they are charging for parking there, and that's what's causing us part of the problems, and like you said, and their rents are higher than other places, even without the parking. So I don't believe we can tie those two together. But it still doesn't address my concern. I guess, like, what I'm looking for is a solution for our seniors that are really struggling, that rely on their cars because the bus isn't convenient for them, they have to walk too far, they don't feel safe on the bus. How can we address that situation? Could we look at a 48-hour exemption so that they do have the time, but like they say, some of them struggle to get down. There's not enough parking on site. They knew that when they brought in there. And again, I'm going to refer to the Supreme Court of Canada decision, which says our zoning and parking bylaws cannot go against the human rights. And that came out in 2022, that decision. So it's something I would urge you to look at, because they said that zoning and municipal bylaws are increasingly coming under human rights challenges, and they're winning them. So I think we need to really look at that, because it's my belief that if they did lay human rights, we would lose. Because we knew coming in there that people with low income still drive cars. We can't make the assumption that they don't, and when we don't provide the proper number of parking, we're discriminating against them based on age and income. Anyhow, for me, I would like to do a further report, again, addressing what can we do to look at the issues on, and I think the areas like we're really looking at is like the Selby, the Prideaux's, where it is lower income residents living there, and there's not adequate parking supplied. And you know, whether it be we do a 1 week exemption like they do in Vancouver in parts, there are weekly exemptions. They have to move them once in a week. And there's even someplace in Vancouver, depending on the area, where they don't have to move at all. So I don't know if you could comment on that, either Mr. LeBerge or Mr. Rose.
We're going to take obviously some comments and questions now, but we do need a recommendation at some point, Mr. Sims. So I'm just thinking.
Not ready for recommendation.
We're not ready for a recommendation, no. Did you want to respond to Councillor Armstrong?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I think, you know, under the options section of the report, the recommended option is really to work on this strategy approach and this principled approach. It doesn't deal with the immediate pain of what you're looking for, but and it's about change, you know, just to have a tighter parking strategy overall. And just maybe to a brief response to Councillor Thorpe's rant was that the parking that's in the pinch, like there are certainly pinch points, was demonstrated on the mapping. It's one of the challenges. People don't know where to go if they want to go to Maffeo Sutton for an event on the weekend, or we've seen these sort of crazy events when there's graduation and so on and so forth. But people don't know where to go to get close by parking. They just think that there's one parkade and that's it. So wayfinding is a big part of that. So that might help. Overall in the downtown, we've got enough parking currently, maybe not where people want it. And so that's maybe part of the first option on the principled approach, is improving that understanding of parking. The second option, which as Mr. LeBerge has sort of hinted, is there's an administrative burden every time we try to do something that's unique to certain conditions, right? If we have a basic principled approach that says, you know, it's only 2-hour parking anywhere on any street, then that's a really easy enforcement thing to do. But once you start making exceptions, then it becomes more challenging. So the second option in the report would be to have that sort of support, additional support within the bylaw section to administer some sort of a program, whether that would be, you know, based on LEAP and SPARK, the leadership, or the Mr. Harding will have to fill me in on the entire acronym, but just on the balance between income and disability, that's, you know, sort of one option. But we've estimated that might be half an FTE, but I think, as Mr. LeBerge pointed out, we have one clerk now dealing with all of the challenges, and it's going to be challenging.
Sure. And just as follow-up, I appreciate that. I didn't realize that your report number 2 would look at that, so I think that's a good thing. And if you could also look at those new Supreme Court decisions, which I think are going to have an impact, because probably you weren't aware of them because they just came out last year. So I think that's going to have a huge impact on how municipalities do their business. And my extra point, if number 2 does pass, which I'd like to make the motion, but I'll wait till the other speakers, that perhaps we could involve the accessibility and inclusive or diversity committee as well in that, because I know that has become an issue at that group about the lack of available parking for people with disabilities. So, and I know Mr. Rose has been there before and his reports were very well received, and I know he took some of the comments from that group, so I really appreciate that and the time. And Mr. Zaire too, I didn't mean to rag on you, but I missed the point that was just for the downtown. That was a great report, so thank you.
Madam Chair, I just want to point out.
Yes, I see it. Thank you. Councillor Manley first, and then Councillor Kesselbrook.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to staff for this report. I have a question just about attachment C, and it talks about car share programs. And I know at Pacific Gardens Co-housing, they lobbied to get Moto to park, leave a car there, because a lot of people in that community use car share. When the issue of butter tubs, parking around butter tubs, the seniors complex there came up, I talked to somebody from Bolinas Housing about if they'd approached Moto or Evo car share programs to see about getting cars in these places, and they said that they had tried, but Moto had already picked other locations. And I know the city provides locations like parking spots. I've seen them around the city for Moto, and I'm just wondering about how we can be incentivizing these car share companies to be using or leaving cars in spots like the seniors complex on Prudhoe. We're going to see major build there at Prudhoe and Comox, and at places like Butter Tubs, to incentivize them to do that. Because if seniors are using cars, once a week and then paying huge amounts of money to keep a car on the road, it doesn't really make sense for them. And their car share programs make a lot of sense in those kind of situations where somebody doesn't have to hop in a car to commute every day to go to work or pick up kids to go to all kinds of different activities, but just needs to get to their groceries or a weekly event or whatever. So I'm just wondering what kind of incentives the city can have in terms of finding those spots for car share companies. Thanks. Or co-ops.
Ms. Rose?
Through the chair. So we have to dig into what opportunities there are to collaborate with Moto, but we have in the past worked with them to understand what their business model is and how they're seeing successes. And one of the key things, they do have that one car down on 7th Street. It's a bit of an outlier, but their core business plan is to ensure that each car is no more than 800 meters from the next one, so that if somebody isn't able to use the one they had their first choice, the second choice isn't an unreasonable distance away from that. And so over the past, pre-pandemic and now sort of in the last 18 months or so, they're getting back on track to adding roughly one car per year and expanding their network out. So if you look at the map, you'll see sort of that concentric growth out of downtown. They do, again, also have a bit of an outlier at BC Ferries on Stewart. But I think one of the things that would enable us to see that move forward more quickly is to identify and work with developments in that sort of those growth rings. And so if we see an opportunity within that next 800 meter buffer, we can highlight how that could be a good opportunity if we wanted to have that discussion. And so, I mean, they do run as a business. They have a model and it is very explicit. I've heard some questions previously about the difference between Moto and Evo. Evo is a very different beast. It is really viewed or intended for more like commuter type traffic. You take it, you go from wherever, like from point A to point B, you leave it there, and then you get a different car to come back. Whereas the Moto are very much a home-based. You keep returning it to the same location. So in short, to answer your question, there are definitely opportunities to continue to work with Moto, but it takes that sort of strategic thinking and opportunity to identify where they could go next and coaching potential development in that direction, or independent of a development, just identifying with Modo where the obvious holes are in their system. So.
Yeah, clearly with a city that's 22 kilometers spread out, doesn't work with their model super well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Manley. Councillor Gasselbrock.
Thanks, Chair. A couple points. I agree with the overall direction that we as a city need to move in. I think the economics and car ownership, to what Councillor Thorpe and Mayor Krogh enjoyed, those conditions are changing, and I think we do need to have our eye on moving in that direction. And for somebody who's owned a vehicle their entire life and they're moving into subsidized housing, asking to shift that, it's a large ask, especially when the infrastructure is not totally in place and the habits, and it's going to be an awkward, gangly process as we make the transition, not to mention our challenges with our city layout. That being said, I do think we need to continue with our eye on the prize, and looking at options of these transportation demand management tools and refining it, I think is something that we should be doing. A lot of people haven't had the economics, explicitly put in front of them. And if there's an option for car share that's very accessible and, some support in utilizing that system, as opposed to, wasting $6,000 a year on a vehicle that's maybe used, once every 2 weeks, might not make sense anymore. And I think people do need assistance to do that. That being said, as we move, and work towards making these structural changes, I'm just curious, would we be overloaded if we just look at an exemption process, and maybe it might require a bit of additional staff time, but where very localized areas where we're getting the complaints, if it's only getting complaints from 3 areas, if we were to entertain every single exemption that's being asked for right now, would it completely undermine the rest of our system, or could we do that and just kind of carry on? There was maybe 5-10 people that showed up here. That's my question to staff. Would that overload things? And could we look at, in the short term, just providing these exemptions? Maybe my understanding is not clear, but if somebody comes to our manager, if we have a staff person and they, give them their story with some background facts of why they require this exemption and why currently things just aren't working, we put them into the system, their license plate no longer scans, and then end of story, and don't overly advertise this, could we get by for the next little while and deal with sort of these short-term issues of some of these people that are struggling currently? That's my question.
Thank you. Mr. Sims?
Thanks, Chair. I think one of the pinch points or pain points that we're experiencing now is precisely because the last 2 decades have been just getting by and making exceptions for certain conditions as we go. If we created an ad hoc program here, we're already past our administrative burden tipping point from Mr. LeBerge's staff. If we create sort of an ad hoc program and don't advertise it, it still creates this whole unintended consequence thing about what about other special needs groups that may need parking on Thursday afternoons at a certain park. I don't know. It's the unintended consequence things of what we do, and this is why I preface some of the remarks with, in an ideal world, everything would be principled and easy, but we're not in an ideal parking world for sure. We try to do this policy-based approach, recognizing that there are hotspots and pinch points and needs, that we try to reflect in how we administer some of the parking zones. Mr. LeBerge may wish to speak to it a little bit further on some of those points, but we're trying to be consistent, we're trying to be fair, and there's going to be some people that we can't help all the
You're
time.
in a difficult position, Mr. Sims, there's no doubt about it. Mr. LeBerge, did you want to comment?
Yes, thank you very much, and I hate to wade into the territory of engineers, but from an No, I don't. From an enforcement perspective, and I'll just use the example of Selby Street, which everybody's familiar with. The challenge that we have there is it's a mixed-use area. You have the BC Eca Center, you have a boutique hotel, you have a daycare, and you have a very finite amount of parking. So if you make exemptions and let certain residents park long-term, they can quickly saturate all the available parking. That's not only to the behest of other businesses, but to other residents. If you have 40 people vying for 15 available spots, that also now eliminates parking for seniors that are going to the Access Center. It's limiting, parents are trying to drop off their children, et cetera. And as what Mr. Sims is intimating, whenever we make exceptions or one-offs, there's always unintended consequences. And quite frankly, there's no equitable way to one-off or accommodate needs. If we go back to the original presentation, it's about is it feasible that people can park outside of their, places convenient outside their building, or are they have to park a block or 2 blocks away? If people are willing or able to go a little bit further afield, the options are much greater. I would also point out the examples like Selby Street is that the most economical pay parking in the city is actually on that block. I think it's $3 a day. It's very reasonable. There are other options, that I would really encourage to consider before we do an exceptions or do things which would ultimately impose a lot of administrative burden on our already taxed staff.
Okay.
Thank you.
More questions? Councillor Armstrong?
Yeah, if you could just expand, it doesn't have to be now, but in that report, what some of the other options are, I'd be interested in hearing those, because I think you and I have had this discussion before where it's actually our policies which have led to the issues with bylaws, because we don't create enough parking, so that's what actually leads to it. I look at the hotel on Selby where we granted them, again, a parking variation, which has led to the issues that we're now experiencing, because we didn't have those problems prior to that. So, thank you.
Councillor Gassenbrook, I just want to go back. Did I give you ample opportunity to ask all of your questions?
Yes, I did have a few follow-ups.
Go ahead.
So just to be clear, we've kind of passed the point where it's administratively feasible to administer exceptions. We've already been doing that, and it is past the point that, if we were going to continue to do that, we need more staff. Is that basically what option 2 is?
That's correct, Chair.
That's correct.
Okay, and would option 2 undermine our long-term process?
Mr. Sims? Mr. Rose?
Through the chair, we have to wait and see. I think that if a program was created, we don't have a high number of requesters at this point in time, but it could very well become a positive feedback loop and gain more and more awareness and popularity, and it could impact sort of broader goals, or it may not. It's a little bit of a shot in the dark right now. So I think really the core thing is, if we were to open that door, we need to ensure that it's at least reasonably resourced from day one, so that we can keep tabs on it and track it. So we'll at least know which way the trend is going.
Okay, great. So just on that comment, if we're looking at hiring another staff person, and right now, we're not dealing with numbers that are going to keep somebody running around freaking out because of just the administrative burden on it. If we could set up an exemption program that is aligned with sort of the ideals around the transportation demand management tools, where it's like, if you want to have this parking exemption, you need to be living in a place where maybe the infrastructure that was put in didn't fully account for the current conditions. You have a disability, there's no moto nearby. You've been walked through by somebody looking at the economics and how much you're using your car. If you're using it every 2 weeks, there's a moto there, and you just have not had anybody help you kind of like use the moto for the first time, getting support with that. Once you've gone through all that, and it's like, yeah, you know what, given the situation, you are presented with a large structural barrier and you should have an exemption, you get the exemption. And so that it's still aligning with what the direction we're going, but helping people making that transition. And if it's not at a point where, you know, there's hundreds of people asking for these exemptions, you know, maybe we can have this ad hoc approach for a while that is also providing the services of getting people transition. And maybe that person, when they're not, you know, dealing with the administrative issues or helping, you know, with the MOTO incentivizations and reporting back on where the gaps are. Because I think when someone asks for an exemption, that is data that is saying, okay, these are things that we may not have thought about or gaps in the system. And it's valuable when we're actually needing information to design these more principled policies so that they're a better and better fit each time. So I think that if we can look at, if we're going to be hiring somebody, having it not be one that's, you know, that's looking at the big picture and dealing with the current situation, but moving us forward. And, you know, I hope that's clear what I'm trying to explain. But, you know, we're going to be in growing pains no matter what we do. And we just have to be keeping our eye on the big picture and moving in that direction while dealing with the specifics of transitioning the community.
Any other response before we go on to the next? Is that it, Councillor Gasselbrook?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. No response? Mr. Sims?
Chair, I
keep saying the same thing.
Yeah, I just get a little nervous around the unintended consequences. That's where that's the nervousness that I think staff feel.
You've made some good points on that. So we've got two other councillors, and then we should be coming to a resolution. Councillor Thorpe and then Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, I think we have to be guided by policy, and it needs to be policy which is open and transparent to our community. It seems to me that we're dealing here talking about challenges around how and when do we grant exemptions, potentially, or how do we deal with enforcement? And both of those things stem from the root problem is that we do not have enough parking spaces, and that's a tough challenge to overcome. I recall one development a couple of years ago, which was granted a parking variance on the condition that they establish a car share spot on their property. It was not taken advantage of, and eventually they discontinued it. So that's not always the answer. But to follow up on my rant earlier, I don't like to criticize or complain without a possible solution, and something has just come to me, so I'll share it. When developers develop a piece of land, they are usually required to donate a small section of land, usually for park area, which I totally support and encourage. Perhaps in future we should also require developers to donate a small portion of land to be used for parking purposes. And that could involve a site for MOTO, secure bicycle storage, and a few spaces for residential parking for people in that area to take some of the cars off the street. And I'm only being half facetious here. I think it's an idea that we might need to actually consider. So I'll leave it at that, and again, thank you very much.
Councillor Armstrong and then Mayor Krog.
Can we make a motion yet, or do you want to speak first, Mr. Krog? Mayor Krog.
Mr. Krog. Mayor Krog, did you wish to have
Thank you, Chair. I was going to move the recommended motion. I think we've talked about this long enough.
I'd like to move recommendation 2.
Oh, well, I wanted to move recommendation 1, but
Well,
Councillor
I
Armstrong,
asked first.
Councillor Armstrong's first.
Councillor Armstrong was first, so I'm going to start with Councillor Armstrong.
Yes, I would like to move recommendation 2 because recommendation 1 doesn't address the problems that we're looking at throughout the city.
Would you read it just for the public and staff?
No, that's fine. Just move recommendation 2.
Is there a seconder? There is a seconder. Okay, comments? No comment to this?
Called question?
Councillor Hemmons?
Thanks. I'll just.
Oh, sorry, I apologize.
Thanks. I'm just going to provide my rationale for seconding the motion, and I agree with everything that Mr. Rose has said about pinch points and our vision of ourselves as a city and where we're trying to go. But I'm compelled by this idea that if we add more resources, we're going to be better supporting those residents who have disabilities. I'm thinking of the folks who qualify for LEAP. Those folks, I think, would greatly benefit from some exemption, some consideration of exemption. Oh, pardon me. I have a very wet lap now. That was very close.
Anything?
No, thanks. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Mayor Krog.
Thank you very much, Chair. So and correct me if I'm wrong, but I read option 2 as saying we're going to include a decision point in the 2024-2028 financial plan deliberations for additional support within the park administration group. So I would read that to say we're going to hire more people to ensure that we enforce the parking regulations, which will tick off even more the people who are complaining now about the enforcement of parking regulations. Am I wrong in this?
Administrative, Mr. Sims? Or
Madam
Mr.
Chair,
Rose?
it's really about, as we bring forward the financial plan for 24 and beyond, this would be a consideration for council, this particular item. So, yes.
So, Chair, as I understand it, then basically we're going to how shall I say, effectively, arguably, enforce the regulations that have people upset when they get tickets now. So, no, I'm not prepared to support option 2, but thank you.
Any other comments? Councillor Armstrong.
I actually disagree with Mayor Krog. I think it's also about providing the administrative staff to look at it from the LEAP perspective in those. So I think it's more than just enforcement, and I see them agreeing with me. It's not about the enforcement, it's about providing administrative staff, which I believe they need anyhow. And we always have the option of saying no, but for me, I feel very strongly about trying to follow through for the seniors, and I've talked to at least 60 or 70 who are very much impacted by that, and at least then I can say I tried my best. And that for me is very important. So that's why I want to bring this, and I recognize it's more work, but I don't think this problem is going to go away. We're going to continue to have the problems. And at the end of the day, it does actually fall back on councils that kept voting for the variances. So it's not on staff and it's on us. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Councillor Gasselbrook.
Councillor Gasselbrook.
Yeah, from my understanding of the motion, option 2 would allow current residents with limited mobility and income to have easier access to on-street parking, which could reduce the burden of needing to move the vehicle once per day. This would allow for additional support with the parking administration group to support a parking bylaw exemption program. So this option 2 is about implementing a parking exemption bylaw program.
Is that correct? Okay. Any other comments, Councillor Gasselbrook? Are you in favor of it?
No, yeah, I am in favor of that. Thank you.
Okay. All right. If we're ready, we'll call the question then. Option number 2. All those in favor? Councillor Armstrong, Councillor Hammonds, Councillor Thorpe, Councillor Perino, Councillor Gasselbrook, Councillor Manley, and Councillor Brown, and Councillor Eastmere. Motion opposed? Sorry, opposed. Mayor Krog is opposed. Motion is carried. Thank you so much. I'm sorry. Just a final comment, because we were talking a bit about, and I don't want to use the word ageism, but the truth is, as Mayor Krog, we were commenting, the fact is, people need to get around, and we're still using our cars, and when you're not 100% physically able to walk a distance, it's a problem. I mean, I can tell you just what I've gone through the last week with an injury. You don't move the same. So, put on a few years and some issues, some physical issues, it's tough. So we certainly need to find some solutions. So I look forward to that. So thank you so much. I think, Ms. Gurry, time for a break?
Yes, thank you, Madam.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, we're going to take a break. It's going to be very fast. We're going to come back at 3:10.
Missed which point. Are we talking about department sidewalks?
Yes, exactly. I mean, are we going to get the bang for the buck from my perspective, as opposed to what we're doing with these upgrades proposed on Albert, Selby, Dunsmuir, etc.? I mean, it's staff's recommendation, so this is the serious stuff. This is not terribly political to me. I rely on staff and their views on this, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but.
I do very much appreciate the question, because these are the things that we wrestle with too when we bring these options forward for you. It isn't always about the numbers of pedestrians. I think you've heard before, we use this analogy that you don't build a bridge based on people desiring swimming across the river, right? It's about desire lines. And I would say we weigh children's safety ahead of adult safety. And so that's a very gross overgeneralization. Where we have children walking in parallel or crossing the street, that's going to garner more interest on our side of it than say it's just adults walking to and from their parking spot to work. So can I give you hard and fast numbers around that? No. And we don't have a pedestrian prioritization tool for sidewalks. This location has been in front of us for a number of years, and it's a difficult area to walk. You can see on the photos that it's a narrow space to work with. So yeah, I can't give you a straight answer, Your Worship.
If I may, in terms of the safety aspect of this, I note the report talks about parents have raised concerns about the safety of the neighborhood's pedestrian network. Has the school district raised it on a regular basis? Is there a history of accidents or injury in that particular stretch of the road?
Quite fortunately, we don't have a lot of records of accidents. We have worked with the school district. This is one of the locations that they are interested in seeing improvements. We've done some work out there that was softer on what I would call the signs and lines side of it. And yeah, beyond that.
Do they have, if I may, does the school district have other priorities in terms of safety for children that are higher on the list, so to speak?
Well, we work closely with the school district on our Active Route to School plans. So it's a little bit different than this. That's something we do with them on a regular basis. We have consultants that we work with, and we develop those plans in concert with the schools and the school district. So we have that working in parallel.
Thank you. For what it's worth, Chair, I appreciate the intent of Councillor Hammond's motion, but I'm not sure I'm prepared to go against the staff recommendation, which is in fact option one. While approve the recommendation that when allocated projects listed under the intersection upgrades,
Feels like you're going against staff recommendation.
I'm not convinced. I'd love to hear more. Tell me why I'm wrong.
Okay, we have several more councillors to speak. We'll go to Councillor Gesselbrook, then Councillor Hemmons, Councillor Manley, and then Councillor Armstrong.
Thanks, Chair. When I was reading through this list, what was proposed by Councillor Hemmons actually came into my mind, and it was exactly what I was hoping to see, was to swap out the Albert Street crossings with the Departure Bay sidewalk. That's been a long time demand from the community. I personally have had to walk with kids across to Wardroper Park. My brother was teaching at the school for a while there, and it's super sketchy stretch of road. That's why the boulders have been put up, and it requires more permanent infrastructure. So I think that it's very reasonable, and it's a known issue in that area. So I think this is a way that we can quickly remedy the situation. Thank you.
Before we go to Councillor Hammonds, Mr. Sims, did you want to comment?
Thanks, Chair, and hopefully mostly to address some of His Worship's concerns. It's really around the staff recommendation here is based on sort of providing a menu. So this is really, as Councillor Hemmons noted, at Council's discretion as far as which projects. We're bringing forward the highest priority projects as a whole package. The crossings generally, like this is again to use Ms. Thomas's comments, it's a sort of a gross generalization. Crossings are the points of conflict where potential injuries happen. Not so much along longitudinal areas like sidewalks, as an example. Having said that, Councillor Gesselbrock noted, and quite rightly, this has been in front of us for an awful long time, and it's been a very high demand area. And the road is a little dodgy. The bollards were an interim or hopeful step to try and provide a little bit greater safety. So I think his comments were accurate as far as the safety, and it really is council's discretion. We're not making a strong recommendation that, no, you must stick with, you know, the crossings versus the sidewalks. We recognize there's these value trade-offs that His Worship mentioned. You know, do we do a sidewalk or do we do 3 crosswalks? It's.
We'd like you to be able to do both.
Yeah. Obviously, yeah.
Okay, Councillor Hemmons, Councillor Manley, Councillor Armstrong, and then Mayor Krog.
Thank you, Chair. I really appreciate staff's desire to package the intersections and the sidewalks, and I suspect that was partly the rationale for the list we received. But to Mayor Krog's point and following up on Mr. Sims' point, this is council's discretion, and I think if we weigh the improvement of a couple of intersections downtown, a downtown that is already seeing big capital improvements and major investment from this council, like with I mean, we can look at this. Like, I wouldn't want my kids walking to school on that street with cars flying by them. It seems a bit perilous, and I think I would far prefer to see kids get to school safely on an amenity that the neighborhood has been asking for a number of years, rather than intersection improvements downtown. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Manley.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to support this motion. I would like to see all of these improvements made, but I think it's important for children's safety, and I think that takes paramount, as noted already. And Departure Bay Road is, you know, it's a real clear run without many stop signs or stoplights on it. And unlike Albert Street, where there is a stop sign at the corner of Milton, and there's, you know, it's not as much of a potential racetrack for drivers as Departure Bay Road tends to be. And so I think that this student safety is really important in this situation, and just having viewed that area myself, I'm satisfied that I think this is a good solution for now, and we'll get to Albert Street when we do. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Manley. Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. I'm in favor of this. I think it's really important. There's many kids that use that road. That road is far busier than 4th because a lot of people use 3rd instead of 4th. So I think our dollars would be better spent looking after kids walking to school than some of the odd university student walking there who should actually be more observant of traffic than a young child. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Krog.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I'm just looking back at the report. Referencing the language, higher scores represent higher priority and lower scores represent lower priority when considering which locations represent the best improvement in our community's need to support walkability. At the same time, pedestrian collisions rarely occur along corridors. Instead, they typically occur at crossings. That said, pedestrians spend most of their journey on corridors. If they're not comfortable, they're not likely to walk. I just come back to it from a public safety perspective. I'm not satisfied that that particular section, which is walked now and has been for a long time, versus the long list that the staff has carefully put together, outweighs what staff's proposed. So, as much as I'm sympathetic, obviously, I'm going with option 1 on this one.
Thank you, Mayor Krog. Just a question to staff. Just so I don't have to look through all the notes. How much more are we talking to do that project as well? Another 30,000. So we're going to turn this down for 30,000. Can we find it?
Madam Chair, could I?
Yes,
sorry
please,
to
Ms.
interrupt.
Thomas. Yes,
Were
no,
you
it's
asking about the sidewalk cost in the Departure Bay sidewalk estimate?
well. That one's quite a bit more.
Yes.
I'm just thinking about the other area that we were saying, okay, do this instead of that. I'm just wondering if how much more we were talking about. Am I?
Sorry, just to clarify, is the question, could we do the recommendation 1
yes.
plus Departure Bay?
Yes.
I think that's kind
I'm just wondering how.
discretion.
No, don't leave, Ms. Thompson. We'll just figure out who can give us the best answer.
I'm looking at Mr. Rose because I have the cost estimates at my fingertips. So
yes.
The Albert Street corridor was estimated at $335,000.
Okay, so we're saying.
So they're somewhat interchangeable. which I think was probably Councillor Hammond's desire.
Okay, I see. Hence the 30,000, okay. 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 Councillor Gesselbrock, your hand is up. Did you wish to speak again? It's off? Okay. Oh, and Councillor Hammonds?
Thank you, Chair. I just
Sorry.
want to confirm we're taking a project that was identified as 335,000. We're removing it and putting in a project for 365,000.
I see.
And I'm identifying the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve as the place to pull that additional money.
Thank you. Thanks.
A question through to staff regarding all of this. We've seen dramatic escalations in our construction costs. So I'm curious, when we're compiling lists such as these and saying they're going to cost us $1 million, are we using today's understanding of the labor market, or are we using past understandings, in which case we should probably reduce the size of these?
Good question.
It's an excellent question, Madam Chair. It makes us nervous, of course. We've been trying to deal with the current package of pedestrian improvements and getting pricing that we're not really comfortable with. So there's a couple of lines of thinking here. One of them is we just need to time the release of this work on the street a bit better so that there's more availability of contractors. That's one thought. Another thought is if we were to, as an example, we put out the last package of crossing improvements, and out of 5 contractors that we sort of poked, one gave us pricing that was not very good. And then, so one of the thoughts was to, if there was a sidewalk incorporated into this, then that might attract more attention. That's so. Yes, we're nervous about the construction dollar figures, but I think there's been some looking forward. Yeah.
Councillor Hammonds?
Thank you. If I may, in this list of 8 projects, there are several that I think are the priority. So if staff are finding themselves that that this is going to cost more than the $1 million we've allocated, I would support staff coming back to us and having us prioritize this list.
Thank you.
Good point. Mr. Rose?
Sorry, I'm just going to throw one more thing on that heap. Accompanying the escalation of cost, there's a market capacity challenge we're facing. And so I just want to temper expectations on delivery. It's quite likely this is going to be a 24-month process to get things on the ground. So just
because, Mr. Rose, Ms. Thomas, you talked about these being 2023, and I was thinking it's already halfway through July. So you're thinking 24 months to get this list done?
Based on recent observations, yes, I think 24 months is a more.
Councillor Hammonds, any other comments for that?
What does that mean for the 2024 allocated, but unallocated? Like, if we're still working through these projects, are we?
I think it's akin to the projects we're working through from 2021 and 2022. We're going to continue to just put them in the chain and work them through the system. The detailed design needs to take place, and then it needs to go to market. And so, it's, I think, early in the days of this program, we had more bandwidth, for lack of a better expression, to do a one-off. We could do one sidewalk for $300,000 or a couple of crosswalks for $20,000 each. We're now up to a fairly significant program in a very challenging market. And so we're almost back into what would be a typical capital planning program where we adopt a project, it has its inception, and we work through the system. And so typically that's a 24-month timeline.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. If there's no other comments, so certainly we will look again at the Albert Street one again next year. Is that fair to say? Okay. Okay, if there's no other comments from anyone, I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? Mayor Croak. Mayor Croak is opposed. Thank you so much. You know what? It's good that we bring our differences to the table. It's well worth it. Well worth it. All right. The next one is the Extension Road Traffic Calming. And Mr. Sims, I'll hand it back over to you. Thank you, Ms. Thomas.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So Extension Road traffic calming, we've been in front of council with this project before and seeking approval to proceed with, studying Extension Road as part of our traffic calming program. And it's very clear, as you'll see shortly, that speed is really quite a challenge. And I'm speaking to Mr. Porter in the audience, a member of the Chase River Neighborhood Association. He's got it narrowed down to the offending culprits. Essentially, anyone behind the wheel is creating this problem.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's a universal problem on Extension Road. And my own observation would be just to keep in mind is that everybody wants traffic calming for the person that's behind them. Nobody wants traffic calming for themselves. They want the smooth, easy commute, but everybody behind them is, obviously a maniac, and they need to slow down. But this is an opportunity to introduce you to our transportation specialist, Ms. Quinn Nguyen, and she'll take you through this. She's been working with Ms. Thomas on the traffic calming and extension as well.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Sims. Good afternoon, everyone.
Is it pronounced, it's Quinn Nguyen?
Yeah.
Am I saying that right? Well, welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Quinn Nguyen, and I'll be presenting the Extension Road Traffic Calming Project today. So this is the overview. First, I'll go over the background, then I'll share the project timeline over the years, including the design process, the public consultation and its results, as well as the traffic calming plan, and finally, we will look at project options. The project location is Extension Road from Cranberry Avenue to Cinema Drive, which is also where the city limit ends. The segment of extension is just under 2 kilometers, and there are 2 elementary schools in the area, including the Chase River Elementary School and Cinnabar Valley Elementary School. Prompted by resident request, staff first collected traffic data on Extension Road in July 2020, through which speeding was identified as an issue. With council's endorsement in May 2021, staff proceed to develop a traffic calming plan for Extension Road. So the scope of this project is to reduce travel speeds, which in turn would improve the neighborhood livability and pedestrian experience. The traffic calming plan will be designed such that it also minimizes inconvenience for legitimate road user using Extension Road to access the neighborhood, and maintains acceptable response time targets for emergency vehicles. So to have a more comprehensive traffic data, staff collected traffic speeds and volumes on Extension again in April 2023 when school was in session. The results of this exercise were found to be similar to the results of the initial data collection in July 2020. So the speed limit is 50 km/h throughout Extension Road, except for the school zone area in front of Chase River Elementary. However, the 85th percentile speed was found to be 63 km/h throughout Extension, which is substantially higher than the speed limit. And the maximum recorded speed was 130 km/h on a Friday night. We also observed the same pattern that the further south of Extension, the less traffic and the higher speeds of vehicles. So as mentioned, traffic calming on Extension was first requested by residents in the area in spring 2020. Traffic data was collected in July 2020, and in May 2021, council was presented with 2 options. The first option included advancement of the project to the public consultation stage so that ultimately engineering measures can be applied, while the second option included educational and awareness campaigns, which does not involve engineering modifications to the road. And council approved the first option, effectively advancing the project to the public engagement stage. In 2022, staff developed concept options and shared the conceptual design with internal stakeholders, so that includes the 911 fire rescue, and using the feedback internally, internal feedback, including the location of the speed hump where that should be located. We incorporated that into the design, and the proposed plan was finalized at the end of 2022. In January 2023, the Extension Road Traffic Calming Project is available for the public to view on the city's website. To inform public of the consultation process, staff installed project information signage along the corridor and communicated that with the Chase River Community Association. The community engagement efforts yielded 2 meetings with the Chase River Community Association. So the TRCA have been strong supporters of the traffic calming project, and using an online platform in June 2023, the CRCA asked for signatures of support for the project, and 43 residents responded. And we also carried out 1 meeting with the Chase River Parent Advisory Committee and received 58 emails responses from the general public. Within these 58 responses, 27% of them were strongly supportive of the plan. Another 27% was against the plan, with their primary concerns being the increasing volumes in their neighborhood. And then there was the rest, 46% consisted of mixed feedback, where most respondents were supportive of traffic calming initiatives, but they were also concerned with road narrowing at certain intersections. So staff have since modified the design to reflect public feedback, including relocating a speed table, revising the locations and style of road narrowing, and adjusting driveway access. So this slide shows the traffic calming plan at the north end of Extension Road, where crosswalk improvements and intersection narrowing with bollards will be applied. For the school zone area, we will be installing the speed reader board just below the school zone signs. This is some examples of crosswalk improvements, which would consist of concrete median or refuge island with signage. This design would shorten street crossing distance for pedestrian and serves as pedestrian refuge for 2-stage crossing. Tactile walking surface indicator is also a part of the standard design for a crosswalk. These are a few examples of intersection narrowing with flexible bollards. This will help reduce the crossing distance for pedestrians and narrow the lane width, which would encourage drivers to slow down. On the south end of Extension Road, the traffic calming plan will include crosswalk improvements, intersection narrowing with bollards, a speed table south of Richardson Road, and concrete medians at the intersection of Cinnabar Drive and Extension. So following city's engineering standards, the speed table will have table-like features with a ramp up and down and a flat top surface of 3 meters wide. It will also have signs and pavement markings to notify drivers of its location. Concrete medians will narrow the road and require motorists to do a proper turn instead of swinging wide at a higher speed. So staff recommends that council approve the advancement of Extension Road traffic calming project to the construction phase with funding from the 2023 financial plan. If council chooses to endorse construction, work would begin this fall and complete by spring 2024. And we will also collect traffic speeds and volume post-installation to measure the effectiveness of the project. This brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you for your time.
Well, let's see if there's any questions for you, Ms. Newman, okay? Yeah. Questions, Councillor Armstrong to start.
Yeah, I have about 3. Were the RCMP consulted on this? Because I know they have quite a bit of concerns about the narrowing of roads, which have led to a lot more accidents. They actually don't reduce accidents, they actually increase it.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Thomas?
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Sims has to help me with the microphone. The RCMP, we do work with our through Madam Chair to Councillor Armstrong, we do work with the RCMP on our Road Safety Committee about these kinds of things, and this particular location wasn't raised to our attention, and we're happy to take that back and have a conversation.
And could it go to a traffic reconstructionist who's been there for all the fatals? Because if you look at where most of the fatals were, there are where the road is narrower. I have an issue with the fact, like, people seem to think that the narrowing of Mitchell Drive has slowed traffic down. Well, I sat there for a day and it certainly hasn't. And there's been a huge increase in accidents, not necessarily pedestrian, but definitely motor vehicle accidents. And I'm concerned about the concrete median for the traffic calming, especially with the big trucks going down there. And I don't know if you know, but cars are now 20% wider, and we haven't accommodated for that in our road designs. And I sent a bunch of information to Mr. Sims on it, which showed that cars are wider and not shorter. So I'm concerned about that median because I believe it's going to actually create more accidents and more problems.
Ms. Thomas or Ms. Nguyen?
Through you, Madam Chair. We do take safety very, very seriously, and we do double check our turning templates for our vehicles, and we are happy to make sure, triple check that to make sure the vehicles can be accommodated safely.
And we've looked into the widening of like the vehicles, like the widest one is now 98 inches compared to what it used to be 70.
We typically use garbage trucks for that, garbage trucks and fire trucks, because that's what the city vehicles are. We also have accommodated the heavy vehicles that are using Cinnabar for commercial purposes. So we are using those larger design vehicles in this process.
Has this design gone through the trucking industry so that they can comment as to what the issues may or may not be? Because that would be a concern I have, as that is a main industrial road.
Absolutely. We for sure agree with you, and we will make sure that that is accommodated.
Until that's done, I can't approve this plan, so I'll be voting against it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair, very much through you. Thank you very much for the report. I know that traffic on Extension Road is a major concern of the residents, especially in that area. And as the report indicates, they're mainly concerned about another exit out of the area, which was not the purview of this report. My question is this: having worked in that area for many years and driven that road, I know in the winter it's extremely icy on Extension Hill, and there's been many cases of traffic stopped at the bottom of the hill close to Chase River Elementary, and on the other hand, people coming down the hill from Cinnabar Elementary towards Chase River often have trouble controlling vehicles. So my question is, would these traffic calming measures interfere with road safety during winter conditions? Is that possible to say?
Ms. Nguyen?
Yeah, thank you for your question. So typically, we can always accommodate the snows and ice removal. So if it is required, the bollards can always be removed to accommodate that. And aside from that, I know that it's during winter conditions, it's just the nature of the sloping and the geometry of the road. It makes it very hard for drivers to really pass through, but it is something that we do consider and can modify for snow and ice removal.
Thank you. I guess specifically I was thinking of what you're referring to as speed tables.
Right.
Those were going to be placed on the hill for traffic traveling up the hill in winter conditions. That might cause a real problem. So I don't know if you can comment on that, Ms. Thomas.
Through Madam Chair, Councillor Thorpe, the speed table is going to be at Richardson. We're not planning raised speed tables in front of Chase River Elementary. Our fire partners did not want to see anything raised through that section of roadway because it's their primary route. So they were amenable to doing something further down the corridor, but not as close to their fire hall as the school. So those two crossings aren't going to be raised.
Okay, that answers my question there. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. I think in general I will support this. I think that traffic calming is very important in that area, and I think we need to take the next step. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hammonds, we do not have a motion on the floor yet.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move the recommended motion.
Thank you. Seconder? Seconded by Mayor Krogh. Comments?
Yeah, thank you. So I was coming home from the river last night, and I tried to do the speed limit on that road, and it was next to impossible with the flow of traffic and the sense of the wide openness. I hear that 27% of the residents were primarily concerned, who voted against or were against the plan, they're primarily concerned with another exit out of the area, and I agree with Councillor Thorpe that wasn't the purview of this. That's something that is ongoing work for the city, but that 27% were not against traffic calming in general. So for me, that adds up to over half of the respondents being supportive of this. And to another point, I think since I've been on council for 5 years, we've been wrestling with this area and what to do, and I think we just need to try something. And we've shown that if something is not working, we're willing to modify it. So my sense is that we just get going on this. We'll see how it works. If we need to adapt going forward as necessary, we will. Thank you.
Mayor Croak?
Thank you very much, Chair, and I just want to echo Councillor Hemmons' remarks in terms of trying this, and if it doesn't work, fine, we'll change. I mean, I'm satisfied, though, that the present situation is dangerous. It requires addressing, and this is a recommendation of staff who I trust and believe they know what they're doing, and I'm impressed with the presentation today, so I'm going to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong?
I will be opposing the motion as it doesn't address to me the safety. As a matter of fact, as a former accident investigator, I believe it increases the accident issues. So that's why I've always requested that the police be looking at these, especially those that investigate the accidents, because it gives no person an out. And when you don't have an out, that's when you have head-on accidents. And I just think those concrete medians are going to cause nothing but problems, and I think we're going to have some fatals there because of them. So I just can't, without hearing from the trucks, who are very much impacted as well, and from the police. I think, no disrespect, but I believe those should always be done before we're asked to comment on these. I've asked for that numerous times, that the fire department doesn't respond to the investigation portion. So for me, I just can't support it in the current. I think it's very important to get something done, but I think it needs to be done properly and not piecemeal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. I'm concerned. I value Councillor Armstrong's opinions, particularly given her career. Do you wish to comment at all about what has or has not been done? And I mean, I feel, have we done the work that we've needed to do with the police and trucking associations, that kind of thing? Have we? I just want to know. I'm in favor of it. For me, it's like waiting another year for, these upgrades. We need them. I've seen that road too. It's awful, So I'm anxious to put the motion on the floor and vote for it to get it going. Having said that, I'm very cognizant of what Councillor Armstrong has said, so I'm just wondering if you could comment on that.
Thank you for that, Madam Chair. We did a lot of consultation on this particular project and around the commercial vehicles and the safety aspects of it. The Neighborhood Association has been in favor of it from the beginning, and they have representatives from the commercial industry in the Neighborhood Community Association. The neighborhood, I keep calling them neighborhood associations, I'm sorry, it's the Chase River Community Association. Yes. Has representatives from the trucking industry on it, and they were supportive of this work. So for us as staff, that was sufficient. In terms of the road safety, we do know our Vision Zero platform is that managing speed is a key component to addressing road safety and improving the experience of active transportation and our residents. So if we are able as staff and engineers to manage speeds on a road, that improves the situation for everyone, other drivers, people dropping their kids off, pedestrians and cyclists.
That's right.
That, as a community as a whole, we believe that is the right way to address community safety, is through this Vision Zero managing speeds. And from that, we get less police response because there are fewer speed-related collisions.
Okay.
That doesn't always meet with everyone's intuition around it. However, that's where the road safety engineering comes from, that basis of managing speeds improves road safety.
Okay. No road is completely safe, no road. But if we can minimize the pace of drivers, hopefully we'll reduce the number of accidents that are there and save lives. Okay, if there are no other comments, I'll call the question. All those in favor? And opposed? Councillor Armstrong is opposed. Motion passes. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ms. Nguyen. Thank you very much. Did a great job. Great presentation. Thank you.
Madam Chair, can I just confirm if Councillor Brown was in favor or opposed? Sorry, he was up on the screen.
Councillor Brown, you were in favor or opposed?
In favor.
In favor. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And they're going on to question period. We do have Dale Porter here on the extension traffic calming issue. if we could have him come down and speak to it. I was just thrilled that we had a member of the audience here for such a length of time, so bless your heart for being here all afternoon. Thank you.
My name is Dale Porter. I live at 1882 Richardson Road. I was elected to come here today because I'm the old guy that doesn't have a job. The rest of the council, they're all off on their jobs.
We appreciate it, Mr. Porter.
We've been working on this for quite some time, as you know. My big concern of late is the serious escalation in the accidents. We've gone from a couple hours of power's gone out. Not a big deal. Spend too much time on the internet anyway.
Yeah.
Then we go to, let's encroach on private property and destroy said car parking backwards in a travel trailer, which is better than the house it could have hit. More recently, and very recently, we have a car, airborne, takes out chain link fencing and a vehicle access gate to land in a school playground. Luckily, one walked, one only had to be extricated. The next step in that escalation is who's bringing the yellow sheets out. That's unacceptable by any stretch. As far as the heavy traffic in our neighborhood, the sign at the co-op says no vehicles over 13,700 kgs are allowed. 9 o'clock this morning, an 8-axle super train went past my house on Cranberry and Extension. If there's issues with heavy traffic on there, why are they there today? This has to be looked at, and I get it, that this is a big project in any way, shape, or form. I've been lucky to be in meetings with Barb and Jamie, and some of the things they've suggested, in my mind, were ludicrous. The painting of lines. I said, oh, that's stupid. Paint a line, what does that mean? But when I drive down Bruce at Harewood, gee, this road is narrower. They didn't do a thing to it, they painted a line on it. So that registers that there's something to this. A painted line on a road can't be that expensive. The traffic, we've heard all afternoon. Neighborhoods are too small, they're growing bigger. We have lots of empty land, and it's being filled. Every time you build a house, 2, 3, all the houses in my neighborhood all have suites in them, so that's a minimum of 3 cars. I can show you one, it's a rental, there's 7 for one house on Extension and Cranberry. The last one, bad one, power was out for 8 hours. I think that had to do with the yellow sheet that had to be used out on Harewood Lake, or Nanaimo Lakes Road. Accessed, how? Cranberry, Extension. Had to pass through my neighborhood. And I've walked Extension, as I've talked to Mr. Sims earlier. I walked there various times of the day just to see. Yeah. And I've narrowed it down to everybody behind the wheel. There's no demographic or age group that I can say, oh, they've got an N on their car, let's get them. Or they're in a big pickup, let's get them. I've seen it all, including a few that are part of my demographic and the 2 senior counselors over on this side that know better and should know better, and 65K is nothing down onto the crosswalk at 2:30 in the afternoon. Kid walks up, hits that button, and just keeps on going, whether that yellow light's flashing or not at Richardson and Extension. This is getting to be a fairly serious issue and escalating more and more. So I ask that we dig deep to get this pushed through before the yellow sheets have to be used.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Porter. That's great. That's very helpful. Okay, I'll leave that with staff. We know what we're looking for. Okay, we'll have a motion then for adjournment. Councillor Armstrong, Councillor Hammonds to second. All those in favor?